I'm going to use this mic here. Can you hear me at the back, Jenny? Because it's easier for me to walk around. And we're actually, as you can see, we're going to Catherine. Is that you, Pascal? Catherine, can you hear me? Hello, Pascal. We're going to Darwin. Are we? No? Darwin? Dave's in Darwin? Oh, you're at Flinders Medical Centre? Fantastic. We're supposed to be going to Darwin too. I'm not sure if they're there, Dave. Are they? I can hear someone talking. Yeah,
on your computer, because you're online.
Would you shut me down, Dave? Shut him down.
It's not often the boss says that.
Shut me down. Look, thank you very much for your patience. We did think we had it all in the bag. Lots of phone calls, lots of emails, assurances of backup. It's not the fault of Flinders in the city. It's some misconnection back to Flinders at base. So there'll be some very polite but curt letters going out. I do apologise. But now we're here. And as my friend Elsie would say, let's be in the moment. Let's start afresh. So, Uncle, would you please like to give us your welcome?
Marawachanga, Gana Mira, no Wangani, Mani to Bunigani Adana, Nibirico, Mankalankala, Tandanya, Mianaku, Nature Yungandalia, Nature Yakanadalia, Padni Adlu Waru. On behalf of the Ghana people, I welcome you all to Ghana country, and I do this ambassador of the Adelaide Plains people. My brothers, my sisters, let's walk together in harmony. Natalia.
Thank you very much, Uncle. Let me just also acknowledge country here, acknowledge Uncle and Auntie Miriam Rose, and how glad we are to have you, and Ghana people past and present. Myself, I'm from New South Wales. I'm a Koori Fellow from northwest New South Wales. I'm from Tamworth, and my mum grew up in Gadigal country in inner Sydney. But in fact, we believe, I'm not sure, like many Aboriginal families, some of our ancestry is a bit unknown. We believe my mum's father came from from Gamilaroi country, which is where I grew up anyway. So some things go in circles and some things find their way home. To very briefly, because we're obviously behind, I'm just going to give you an idea of what we're going to do today. So, we'd like to think of this in a couple of ways, and I'll explain why, very briefly, why we thought of this particular seminar. This is the second in the seminars of A.K.A, cheekily named A.K.A, other ways of doing things, Aboriginal knowledge in the academy. And we think it's an important series. It's only the second one we've had. It's the third seminar in the Lime, Slice of Lime Network series as well. So we're joining with our colleagues at Lime Network to present this today. And the whole idea of the Aboriginal Knowledge in the Academy series was to say, look, in this particular country in Australia, there's such a wealth of Aboriginal knowledge, or knowledges, plural, across the different clans and nations, that is not fantastically well articulated into the fabric of the nation as a whole. And that, we believe, is to Australia's detriment, and certainly in our work in health, it's to our detriment. So we're trying to do some small things to address that balance. And it started some years ago when I actually read some of the work of Auntie Miriam Rose online, of Dadiri, Deep Listening, and was incredibly moved and thought my thoughts were provoked so much by what she'd written about this idea of deep listening. I'll let her explain as we go on. But the more I probed, the more I found that, in fact, although there are 200 plus discrete Aboriginal nations across the country, there are things, there are ties, there are protocols, there are conventions, there are notions that are in common, in very deep commonality. And one of these, apart from things like spirituality and kinship, is listening. Listening and observing, two things. So we thought we'd base this particular seminar around that, around the ideas of deep listening and of observation and observational skills, and then say, how can that not only build our knowledge about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australia, but what can that do in terms of medical and health professional training and practice? And so then I had the good fortune last August to meet my colleague Elsie Chan from the University of Hong Kong, who was a keynote speaker at the Lime Convention, Lime Network in Darwin, and was very moved by both his ideas around medical humanities, how to help doctors become human beings as well as superb technicians, if you like, around mindfulness, and I love this phrase of turning towards dissonance, of actually saying if something's difficult, don't run away from it. Turn towards it, find a way through it. And Dave and I were in Melbourne just a couple of weeks ago and had the good fortune of running into Heather Gaunt, who works at the Ian Potter Museum of Art on campus at University of Melbourne. And Heather told us, in fact, we happened to stumble across a class with good fortune, working with a whole range of courses at University of Melbourne, particularly in this, for our reference points, with medicine and dentistry students, and helping them through observation, structured observation of art, and tell me if I've got it wrong, to actually deepen their observational skills in the service of being better practitioners. So we thought, what a fabulous nexus. Can we pull it off? So we've pulled it off. Technology's put a few barriers in our way, but there you go. So we've pulled it off, and I'm very excited to hear them all. And we have the good fortune also of Professor Lambert Shuvith, who's Professor of Medical Education at Flinders, to actually give us a bit of a rapporteur, a medical education perspective and the things we've heard today. And we'll finish with the panels. Look, I won't go through the formal program. It's a waste of time. Well, let's have one session, have a quick cup of tea, and come back for a second session. And I'd like, Auntie, would you like to kick us off, please? And maybe we'll ask the presenters to speak for about 15 minutes each, if that's okay, and 5 or 6 minutes for questions on each person. Then we'll have a big half an hour, 45 minutes at the very end for more group panel work, if that's okay. Just get a mic set up. I should just say by way of introduction that...
Can you hear me? Is it on?
Yeah. And he's a senior woman from Ngankarangka, Daly River region, but she'll introduce herself, I'm sure.
Thank you everyone for having me here today. And first of all, I would like to say thank you to Uncle Lewis and the Ghana people for welcoming us. And I would like to acknowledge your people that we're talking on, in particular the land, the people from within the past, the present, and the young ones that are coming up today. Thank you very much. And thanks to the university also for asking me to come and present. They say that he was chasing me all around the country for a long time to try and get me to talk at other sessions, and he eventually caught me. It was a last minute thing, so don't expect to have anything on the overhead. I'll do my best to try and make you feel good about what I'm going to talk to you about today. The talk that I'm giving today is about Dadiri, and I'm sure that many people have read it and tried hard to understand what it's all about. I'll do my best to try and instill it within you today. Many Australians understand that Aboriginal people have a special respect of nature. The identity we have with the land is sacred and unique. Many people are beginning to understand this more. Also, there are many Australians who appreciate that Aboriginal people have a very strong sense of community. All persons matter. All of us belong. And there are many more Australians now who understand that we are a people who celebrate together. What I want to talk about is another special quality of my people. I believe it is the most important. It is our most unique gift. It is perhaps the greatest gift we can give to our fellow Australians. In our language, this quality is called dadiri. It is inner, deep listening, and quite still awareness. Dadiri recognizes the deep spring that is inside us. We call on it, and it calls on us. This is the gift that Australia is thirsting for. It is something like what you call contemplation. When I experience Dadiri, I am made whole again. I can sit on the riverbank or walk amongst the trees. Even someone close to me has passed away. I can find peace in this silent awareness. There is no need of words. A big part of Dadiri is listening. Through the years, we have listened to our stories. They are told and sung over and over as the seasons go by. Today we still gather around the campfires and talk together. We hear the sacred stories. As we grow older, we ourselves become the storytellers. We pass on the young ones all they must know. The stories and songs sink quietly into our minds, and we hold them deep inside. In the ceremonies, we celebrate awareness of our lives as being sacred. The contemplative way of Dadiri spreads over our whole life. It renews us and brings us peace. It makes us feel whole again. In an Aboriginal way, we learn to listen from our earliest days. We could not live good and useful lives unless we listened. This was the normal way for us to learn, not by asking questions. We learned by watching and listening, waiting and then acting. Our people have passed on the way of listening for over 40,000 years. There is no need to reflect too much and to do a lot of thinking. It is just being aware. My people are not threatened by silence. They are completely at home in it. They have lived for thousands of years with nature, nature's quietness. When I am out hunting, when I am in the bush, among the trees, or on a hill, or by a billabong, these are the times when I can simply be aware of nature. Because sometimes we take things for granted. Dr. Stenner, the anthropologist who did much of his work amongst my people at Daly River, wrote this, and I quote him: Aboriginal religion was probably one of the least material-minded and most life-minded of any of which we have knowledge. Quote. And I now would like to talk about the other part of Dadiri, which is the quiet stillness and the waiting. Our Aboriginal culture has taught us to be still and to wait. We do not try to hurry things up. We let them follow their natural course, like the seasons. We watch the moon in each of its phases. We wait for the rain to fill our rivers and waterholes and water the thirsty earth. When twilight comes, we prepare for the night. At dawn, we rise with the sun. We watch the bush foods and wait for them to ripen before we gather them. We wait for our young people as they grow, stage by stage, through the initiation ceremonies. When a relation dies, we wait a long time with the sorrow. We own our grief and allow it to heal slowly. If someone passes away, we have the funeral about a week later, and the mourning starts when someone passes. When Australians lose somebody, they have a wake straight away, I guess. Correct me if I'm wrong. After burying somebody, a family member, it might take a year before all of those things happen. We want to own our griefs, so it could be a year before we have the celebration, celebrating the life of that person that had passed. And the right people have to be there. We wait for the right time for our ceremonies and our meetings. The right people must be present. Everything must be done in the proper way. Careful preparation must be made. We don't mind waiting because we want things to be done with care. Sometimes many hours will be spent on painting the body before an important ceremony. We don't like to hurry. There is nothing more important than what we are attending. There is nothing more urgent that we must hurry away for. They say, and it's true, that if you go to the Territory, we had to come and catch a cab this morning to come here. We were kind of hawing and humming whether we should jump on a tram from where we were staying last night. And then we kind of, debated against it, and jumped in a cab and rushing around to get here. And it was 8:15, I think. We were told to leave from where we were. And that was right, that was okay, we did that. But if you're in the Territory, if you make arrangements with some people, so if you say, I'm going to meet you at 8 o'clock, it could be about 10 o'clock after, 10 o'clock, that person will rock up and meet with you. So we say, blackfella time up there. We are river people. We cannot hurry the river. We have to move with its current and understand its ways. We hope that the people of Australia will wait not so much waiting for us to catch up, but waiting with us as we find our pace in this world. There is much pain and struggle as we wait. The Holy Father understood this patient struggle when he said to us, when he visited Alice, if you stay closely united, you are like a tree standing in the middle of a bushfire sweeping through the timber. The leaves are scorched and the tough bark is scarred and burnt, but inside the tree the sap is still flowing, and under the ground the roots are still strong. Like that tree, you have endured the flames and you still have the power to be reborn. My people are used to the struggle and the long waiting. We still wait for Australian to understand us better. We ourselves had to spend many years learning your language, your ways. Some of the learning was forced, but in many cases people tried hard over a long time to learn the new ways. I'm a teacher by profession. I ran a school in my community for 15 years. And some of those times were spent in the city. I come from a traditional background. And that's really important for me to know how you live and work and do things in the city and understand what city life is all about. And it kind of grows within you. You have your traditional way and the Western way. So for me, I feel really comfortable just being here, even in Adelaide. I can go wherever and not be frightened of anybody or anything. I feel confident enough. I visit a lot of schools down south and talk to the children in various schools. Some of the schools come up and visit us and we spend time with them. St. Ignatius is one of them here in Adelaide that visits. So you have to make our people feel so that they're confident and comfortable in being able to walk in two worlds. To be still brings peace and it brings understanding. When we are really still in the bush, we concentrate, we are aware of the anthills and the turtles and the wood lilies. Our culture is different. We are asking our fellow Australians to take time to know us, to be still and listen to us. Life is very hard for many of my people. Good and bad things came with the years of contact and with the years following. People often absorbed the bad things and not the good things. It was easier to do the bad things than to try a bit harder to achieve what we really hoped for. If our culture is alive and strong and respected, it will grow. It will not die. And I believe that the spirit of Dadiri that we have to offer will blossom and grow. And not just within ourselves, but hopefully in our whole nation. I just want to finish off by saying, I think that it is a sense of being. Everyone has it. Sense of being, I think, has been lost. Sorry, Sorry, I'll start again. That is a way of being. It's been lost. So busy in doing, spending lives in constant chaos. Maybe some people like to think by gaining an education, getting a career, earning more money, they'll be more equipped to deal with life. I guess the truth is, it is our sense of being that prepares us for life. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Auntie. It was, I won't even attempt to condense or summarise or add to that. I think it stands by itself. We've got a few minutes while you're here to have some questions, and then we can have more questions when we all sit together as a panel. Any particular comments or questions from the floor? Yes, please. Just one sec. Dave, would you mind running with the... running's probably the wrong word for Dave at the moment, with his injured foot, but if you wouldn't mind being the purveyor of the microphone. So people can hear you on the other sides too. Any joy? Use this one and I'll use the...
This way it goes to the event. This way it goes on.
Thank you very, very much for your talk just now. I'm very interested in crossing cultural divides and really being able to understand not just Aboriginal people but all people. And I get the sense that the deep listening is a really key part of that. How is, if from our perspective, what would make it easier for us to be able to cross cultural divides to deeply understand each other from where you, from the knowledge that you have? I'm not very clear.
It's okay for me to stand here and talk to you about what that is.
Yeah.
But actually doing the acting part is hard. A lot of people make the effort of coming up and visiting me. And I work with them in the community along with other elders. And we talk to them more in depth, I suppose, and let them be the judge of what I'm trying to talk about, and to try and make them understand. You have to get the feel of being with the people, I guess. And some of them come up for a week, some of them come up for a few days. We take them at bush and continue to talk. I think it's a bit like, I've had Christianity introduced to me when I was about 12, and I kind of understand what is expected of me being a Catholic. You know, Sunday you got to go to church and all that sort of thing, and try to understand the Bible. But what I'm trying to say is, and understand what it means to go to church and worship. And I suppose a better way of trying to explain what it is, that I guess people, when they're getting ready to go to church, that they prepare a day or so before getting ready to go to a Sunday service. For Aboriginal people, the awareness of being close to nature and the universe, and being connected and feeling belong to the land and connected is always there. It's not just an on and off thing, I think. So the invitation is open for you to come and visit me. Yeah, yeah, by all means. He's got my contact.
Can you hear me through this mic? Great. Do we have another comment or question? Ready? Matt, and then Tamara. Can you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Matt Fisher. I work up at Flinders in public health research, and I've lived in Adelaide for most of my life. I was just wondering how you see maybe the relationship between Dadiri and some of the traditions of meditation in something like a Buddhist philosophy. Do you see connections there?
I come to this session to listen to him.
That's the answer I was thinking of.
And that's the first album. I think, I mean, I know of them, know of Buddhism, but when it comes to understanding, but I think in lots of things that they talk about is similar to what we do. And I'm very interested in listening to Lee talk about what it's all about. And as we were coming to this place this morning, he spent a lot of time doing things that I do as well, walking in the bush, getting a sense of healing, you know, with the expectation that the service providers put on in the community, the government, the service providers, every Tom, Dick and Harry, he expect you to do this, and the pace that they want you to do things is so fast, you know, and trying to keep up with the time. And in lots of cases, in some communities, the watch that people wear, it's what I suppose controls your life. You've got to be there at a certain time, or you've got to have that in yesterday kind of thing, you know, or have that thing done by yesterday. And it's chaotic. And by just going and spending time in the bush, I think it's also a healing thing for them, and it energizes you to go to the next stage of facing those challenges and feeling good about it. Do you want to say something?
No, just allow for the question to be asked first.
I don't know whether if that answers your question. Okay.
Mine was more of a comment, and to thank you for the gift of the knowledge that you've just imparted here. I found your words to be very profound. One of the things that I think is really critical for the work that we do within Flinders around training, continuing medical education and trying to get the right kind of health professionals out into the field is your words around the doing getting in the way of the being. And I think that's one of the most significant challenges that faces not only us as Aboriginal academics in the field trying to do that, but I think it's a real issue for our students as they try to find that balance. And I found the way that you were describing it to bring a lot of clarity to that issue for me, so thank you.
Thank
you. Just to follow on from the question from the gentleman at the end here that was asking about the comparison between Buddhism and Dadiri, was that correct? I've got that right? I don't know much about Buddhist philosophies or anything, except from several years of practicing martial arts in the past, in the sense of Buddhism in terms of a sense of stillness and that. I wouldn't say that there's much comparison there, because from my understanding of what Ungan is talking about, and I quote her in my methodology chapter around Dadiri as being a place of, it's really about connecting with knowledge entities, and it's alive, it's vibrant. The entities around of a metaphysical and natural status, and it connects with, you connect with it in terms of forming your knowledge about how to move forward in life. So it's sort of, I'm just kind of looking, I've got my draft here, and I'm actually here for selfish reasons, because I'm a postgrad student and finishing off my PhD, and I submit in November this year, but I wanted to have a few moments with Ungan for her to validate my quote of her, what she was saying, and my representation of Dadiri. But I looked at it from it's a deeply and quietly learning through eyes and ears, which is what Ungan's been saying. And conceptualising, it's just a multidimensional relational reality based on those knowledge entities. And so we learn through our eyes and ears rather than the Western, not so much about the Western way of learning where you're asking a lot of questions and your mouth is always open. Sorry, it is. Where our learning is through the other sensories, and it informs what we then say. So, yeah.
Thanks. I just would like to say too, say for example, you're visiting, I'll tell you the fun bit after there's a ceremony that takes place, and it's to do with welcoming people, strangers to our land, and take you to the river, and you stand in the water ankle deep. My community is on the banks of the Daly River, and it's famous for barramundi fishing, and it's also infested with crocodiles. And so what we do is we cup water in a hand and put it on the crown of your head, and you bend down and lift up your shirt and put water on your navel. That's where you came. I mean, you began by being connected to your mum, a new life. And then the head parties for knowledge and wisdom, and all the droplets fall back into the water, and then the current takes your presence through the land, and the river flows out into the sea, and acknowledging our ancestors, and it goes past a lot of the other clans that live downstream from where we live, and also for you to travel through the land so that you're safe. So for me as an Aboriginal person, we don't own the land, we belong into it, and that's what I use, because we've got a Catholic school and our kids go to it, and kids get christened, kids make their first communion, they've got confirmation, that sort of thing. So for us to understand what the Christian teaching, I use that as an example to say, like when you get christened with the water by a priest, you become a child of God. So when you get welcomed into the land by an elder, it's similar, I suppose. And but you know how I said a lot of the kids come and visit us from various schools down south? I take them to the river and say, take your shoes off, take everything out of your pocket, take your watch off, give me your mobile phones, and I hold on to them. You have to swim from this bank to that bank and then come back. And when you come back, I keep all the valuables. Thank you.
That's right. What if we hold that there and come back with some... Because we restructured the... next day, could I have this one? Because we restructured the whole video conference, they didn't extend it to the full time, so it's dropped out again. So that's them calling back to try and get back on. So give us a minute or two. Are you back?
This one.
Thank you. Right, we thought we'd, without being too rude, just keep going so we can return to Auntie in the panel. Thanks for your patience. We're a very patient lot around here.
Thanks, Auntie.
And thank you very much, Auntie, for that. Yes. Without further ado, as they say, I'd like to call up my colleague, Elsie. For those of you who don't know Elsie, he is the person who introduced, if I've got it right, or headed up the introduction of medical humanities to the Faculty of Medicine at the University of Hong Kong. And as he says, it's a developing program being manufactured as we speak. About 3 years into a 6-year generation of this part of their curriculum. And other people are very interested in what they're doing. They're doing a great job from what I have gathered. And Elsie has also been a keynote speaker at Leaders in Indigenous Medical Education Lyme Conference last year in Darwin. And combines these with quite a few things.
So, first of all, thank you very much, Dennis and the Poche Centre, for bringing me over to Adelaide. And so it's really an honor and privilege to be here and to follow on from Auntie about the concept of we're actually human beings and not human doings, but we all turn out to be human doings. And the ability to be still, particularly in the face of difficulty, I think it's something we have lost. I think it's inherent, it was inherent with us, but we have lost it with the busy 24/7 life that we live, the frantic world. So I hope to bring some mindful dings, and Heather was wondering what is a ding. It will be clear. Mindful, you know, is about paying attention on purpose, moment to moment, and not making any judgment, just letting it go, okay? It's harder than you think, okay? So how do I get on to the next slide? Okay, I've got to move on to here, okay. So first of all, welcome to the present moment. And I want you to pause and take 3 breaths. Okay? So the sound of the bell, this dinging, is to remind you to return to the breath. So when you breathe and actually feel, I want you to feel the sensation of the air moving in and out through your body. The chest rising with the in-breath, the chest falling with the out-breath. Just connecting with the breath wherever it is most vivid. It could be the air moving in and out through your nose, or the rising and the falling of the chest. And every time your mind wanders, you can bring it back to present moment with the breath. So this simple awareness of the breath is something we teach to get people to learn to be still. And if there's sounds, mindfulness of sounds as sounds, thoughts as thoughts. So we don't have time, but if during the tea break or whatever, I can take you through a much longer guided meditation, okay? So one of the things I also tell students is that showing up is most important. So thank you for showing up, because if we don't show up, nothing gets done. But now that we have showed up in our bodies, but also in our minds. So that's the hard bit. So connecting mind and body to be present is terribly important. So what I want to do is to, in a way, use this to recognize that there is dissonance in life. And it's part of life, part of the beauty in a way, part of lessons is to have dissonance. But the difficulty is to how do people to, in a way, to recognize and prepare for dissonance, particularly in healthcare. We deal with people in difficulty, difficult situations. We're never perfect. We think here, sometimes doctors, when they wear a white coat, they think, that's it, I'm the doctor. I can solve everything. Okay, that's a perception. And the patient is obviously needs all my help, but actually the help, you can get help from the patient to take care of the person. And I think there's a lot of also likes and dislikes that we add on already to the dissonance out there. And it's very important for us then to make sense of the whole thing, to be still, to look towards the dissonance, and to find a way of connecting and healing, bringing healing to suffering. Cure sometimes, but to heal often, and to comfort always, isn't it? And for that, you need to be still. Okay. So what I do with medical students is a thought experiment. They come in very, idealistic and happy. And I know by the end of year 5, they're going to be disillusioned, bitter, dejected. They've lost it. What has happened? So the thought experiment asked me to do is to do this. So I did it with my class last week. Oh, they were talking about this, the wonderful things. I want to be a doctor. And also asking about part B. There's part B there. It's a reality check. They keep on talking. So the list that comes out is something like that, is that They want to come to medicine to lead discoveries, do cures, be a doctor, status money. I think that's fine, but be careful of list B, the dissonance out there. It's not an easy world, but it's the real world. That there are things that can go wrong. It's going to demand a lot out of you. How do you make sense of helping others and ourselves and not letting other people down? If you do, what can you do to be still and not to cause further damage? To be still and think about other ways of doing it, okay? So it took us some time in our medical school. I think it took us 6 years in the planning, and then we started a program to help students to recognize dissonance in others and within themselves, to hold the dissonance, to be with the dissonance, and then to work towards it and do something as a team. I think it's very important, with the other. So the first one is the Medical Humanities program. As much as I like science, and we're sitting here with a building, we're mindful this building is wonderful, architecturally sound with the lighting and everything, we should be thankful about that. Science has also reduced, I think, human beings who are ill to body parts, disease mechanisms, pathways, molecules. Oh my goodness, they've forgotten there's a person there that you need to connect with. The doctor and the patient are one through their suffering and healing. So I hope the Humanities program will do that. And secondly, can they then hold the dissonance, knowing that the work is noble but difficult? And can they actually also look after themselves while they do this? So this is what mindfulness and mindful practice come in. So in 2006, we launched our program, 210 students per year, 25 hours. If they fail this, they don't get to next year. And our dean was very clear that he sort of makes this a very important program. So it's about understanding the human condition, okay? There's obviously the science is important. The bit that we added in is that healthcare professionals should really take care of themselves. This is something that is not emphasized. Unless you can take care of your own dissonance, it's hard to turn towards the dissonance of others. And the two are linked. So to do this, we basically have a very simple vision. First is that you're a human person, you're a human being, all right? You may be a doctor or a student, but underneath you, you're a human being. You have emotions, you have anger, you have jealousy, you have greed. Obviously, you have noble things like generosity, but beware these things affect you. Just be aware that you're a human being. Secondly, can you cultivate kindness? People say, can you teach kindness? What a silly question. It's an inherent trait. It needs to come out, foster it, water it. It's all within us. And thirdly, to do the very difficult work. Can you go out and really turn towards, you can say, dissonance at the extreme levels. And people can do that. They're humanitarians. They can do that. But I don't think you can go to level 3 without acknowledging level 1 and 2. So I think a lot of the medical schools send their students out to be humanitarian, and they burnt out. They come back. They say, that's enough. I've done it. It's on my checklist. Don't bother me, So I think we need to go 1, 2, and 3. And we do this by celebrating, listening, and storytelling, the stories of suffering and healing of doctors and patients. History of medicine is important. Why we are practicing medicine the way we do. Are there other choices? Death, dying, and bereavement. The final exams we all take is death. How well do we prepare our patients and ourselves? And then the culture of spirituality and healing, what we can learn from our ancestors, from people of different countries, nations. They all talk about humanity. There's a common humanity that we can learn. And then we do this through stories, books, looking at films, doing something with your hands, connecting it with the emotions, performance dramas. And then this is set within a very sound pedagogy. We don't want people to say this touchy-feely. It's not. We work with the medical educators and the educational psychologists. So it's OBSAL, outcome-based approaches to student learning. So you align everything. And they're marking rubrics, and we invite people to come and vet us, external advisors. And so I think the most important is reading and listening and writing. Listening is very important. This wonderful saying is that only in the telling is the suffering made evident. But only in the listening does healing begin. You have to listen. But the stories are terribly important. We make sense of each other by telling stories, not by giving facts. We tell stories. Oh, by the way, what is the time now? What is the time? No, the time actually is now, N-O-W. It stays on your watch. Don't worry about 10:35. So we're in now time. If I tell you it's 10-something, we're in doing time. Okay, we're in now time. Okay, so I like the bit about stories enable us to get a lot of information that we think is non-medical, may not be useful, is very useful in the therapeutic process. We forget that. The diabetic patient, you may tell him your blood sugar is 5.5, but he really wants to understand how he can get on with his life, with his diet, with coping with a lot of things. You want to listen to that story. It's not easy getting him down to a blood sugar of 5.5. I don't know what has happened. Okay, it doesn't matter. So I think Rita Sharon says the ability for us to absorb, in other words, listen to the story is paramount. You're not going to listen. You've got to listen it within organically, not out there. You've got to sense it in the body. And then you've got to try to interpret it, co-create it with the person telling you. And then I like the way you've got to act on the stories and the plight of the stories. You've got to be moved to act. Not just being empathetic, but to empathy with action is called compassion. And compassion, instead of draining you in a way, opens your heart and mind. And it really, charges us up for the work that you do. It's wonderful. It's sort of a super oxygen. And that art is what Heather's going to talk about, that really reading literature, looking at art and difficult pieces of music, including jazz, allows you to understand moments of tension. And if you're comfortable with that, you'll be comfortable with a clinic, with an encounter that's full of tension. Okay? And they did this in palliative care. So it allows them to stay in moments of tension so that they don't reject it, lean towards it, and find a way. Okay, so this is what they do. But I think for that you need to add something called mindfulness. So right mindfulness is one of the noble eightfold path in Buddhism. Mindfulness is to be aware every moment of what's happening with clarity, not add color and thoughts to it. If you have right mindfulness, you should be able to go on to right speech, right action, right livelihood, right understanding, right view, right concentration. So mindfulness is the key. So mindfulness is like that. When you take your dog for a walk, the dog is always mindful. It's a walk, no big deal, all right? You then add on so many things to your walk. Or maybe not in Australia, but in Hong Kong we do. We are so crazy, So mindfulness is the awareness that comes from paying attention moment to moment and not judging it. It doesn't matter what is happening. I've just got to pay attention. And if you are mindful, I tell you, if you're mindful when you eat instead of looking at your mobile or reading the papers, the meals is wonderful. If you're mindful when you look at the trees and really mindful, the colors are brighter, I can tell you that. So it brings back joy in your day. Mindful showering, mindful telephone calls, you can do that, okay? And you can allow you to step out of autopilot because you're in being mode and not doing mode. You're being with whatever it is. And that is very helpful when you need to work, when you're emotionally charged and you need to work towards dissonance. So now this is something from Buddhist psychology that I've learned. I did a master's in Buddhist psychology to help me remain calm when I was a department head, you know how difficult that is, So just to be still, And I realized that from contact, seeing something or hearing something and doing something, you think you're in control, but you're not. A lot of things happen that really pulls you into it. So when I see something, next thing you know, you look at it with greater detail, and then the feelings come up. I like it, I don't like it, I'm neutral to it. Then the perception comes out, like, oh, this is terrible. I don't need to waste my time with this. Or this is a chocolate cake, I better go and eat it, all right? Then the perceptions come out, then the volition comes up, and then you do an action. So mindfulness actually slows you down. And you can see all this happening very quickly. So I see something I don't like, but I could sense it. I could see the thought coming out, and I could hold it. Like Matrix, Keanu Reeves, the bullet comes, shh. The angry words come, yeah, okay, there's anger there. Yeah, but I can hold it, okay. So I think mindfulness really is come full stream. It's also described as an orthogonal rotation in consciousness. Mindfulness means to be awakened and aware, to be present, okay? So that you can see their possibilities. However desperate the situations, if you're in the moment and you allow and you hold in the difficulty, you can make space for choices, okay? And to see clearly what we do is a result of our habit, okay? And also not attending to things that are making us uncomfortable, because the thinking mind takes over. I see something I don't like, I better think of a way to do it, okay? So it's to move from thinking to being. It's to be present. To be present, okay? So this is a nice saying by, this is a Buddhist monk who operates a mindfulness center. He's written a wonderful book called Mindfulness in Plain English, okay, and Mindfulness and Beyond. And he says it actually gives us time. Even half a second, a few milliseconds, if we're mindful of that, it shifts the relationship of the way you see things. You don't go to autopilot, okay? You're not swept away, okay? It's not that you deny, mindfulness is not about pretending things are not there. It's really opening up to it and say, it's fine, I can sit with that. I can sit with that, okay? And it opens up a choice. So Time Magazine, I couldn't imagine. Time Magazine said, we're here in the mindful revolution. And if you actually Google mindfulness, mindfulness will, there's a ding with mindfulness and body, mind, medicine, mental health, physical health, relationships, organizations, families, children's, it's everywhere. Because it is an intrinsic part of our human nature, which we have lost in this busy, frantic world of aspiring to be this and doing that to be number one. Slow down. Things will be fine. You don't have to fix it, because a lot of things doesn't need fixing. We can heal if you allow healing to occur. Okay? So mindfulness opens up choices, but it also means personal responsibility. Okay? You can say a robber is being very mindful if he plans it very well. That's mindfulness. But mindfulness also opens up within the Buddhist world of responsibility. Okay? So are you still here with me? Can I give you a mindful ding? Okay. So welcome back to the moment. Never fails. Every 20 minutes, I ding my students, and they love this. And they can I say, take 3 breaths. I take them through the body scan, which we don't have time. But it requires you to lie on the floor. Next time we can do a body scan. Okay. So mindfulness has come in full stream in many programs. And this is one program that was featured in JAMA about how they got family physicians who were burning out. And they got them to do this program, which is about mindful communication, is learning skills to be still, to listen, to share. And this program showed that you can reduce burnout and promote empathy. Okay? And this program is being repeated. And what they do is, probably do a bit more what we do, is to be able to sit every day at least for 10 minutes. Follow the breath. If you can do that, follow the sounds. If you can do that, follow your thoughts. But don't get pulled along with them. Just letting thoughts be like clouds, like things passing on it, like an image in the screen. Or some people say, I get carried by thoughts. And I say, it's your bus with the wrong number. You don't have to get on the bus. wait for the next bus. There are things you can train, to get us out of mental stickiness. And then obviously to do something they learn from the business world called appreciative inquiry. There's more right than wrong with us anytime. Even in the organization that we like to blame, there are things that are going on right. So let's focus also on the things that are going on right, okay? And self-awareness, do things that nourish you and not deplete you. So take a longer shower, don't rush. Have a longer breakfast, turn off the telly. So these are the self-awareness exercises. It comes with mindfulness. So we do this for our medical students. We start off early by asking them, stressing that medicine is about being wounded, but we are healers as well. And you have to learn to be still and calm yourself, understand your emotions, and you build a resilience. And, we did that as a pilot, and then we're doing it more and more. We're moving to year 3. Year 3 is hard. It's moving towards very difficult emotions. Ask them to visualize scenarios where they get sort of difficult things come up, and let them look at it with clarity. Okay. So students learn this as they go along. And I think the work that we do requires more than mindfulness in our busy lives. It requires us to be compassionate, because it is compassion that takes us to the places which are very difficult. And it's the work that needs to be done. And so there's a mindfulness meditation to foster compassion. May I be well, may you be happy, may he or she, and then maybe the person who has wronged you, the person who has misunderstood you, the person who has hurt you, may they be well. It is the highest level of compassion care. But if you do that, actually it's amazing. I may not like that person, but I can still wish them happiness and free of suffering. And that really opens up the space of working with anybody, anyone. So I came on the plane. I was so happy to get an upgrade to premium economy, but the crying baby, 6 hours. So what I do, meditate on the sounds. Then I meditate compassion. I meditate, may you be well, may you be free of suffering. And then for a while, there was a shift. I was the crying baby. That's okay. I need attention. So it's a little shift like that helps. And really, it can be, there's training involved. And the neuroscience of meditation is very good. And even better, when you meditate, you're more connected. When you're still, you become more connected with some other people. It's paradoxical. You don't have to say, hello, how are you? Are you okay? I'm trying to fix you. If you be still, you can connect more to other people. Okay, and then you can do the work. And then the neuroscience, I don't have time, but it's really very good data. 10 minutes a day for 6 weeks. You can see changes in your neural network, and so you reduce things that will cause you to react, and you sort of turn towards things that you can see the bigger picture, a bigger whole, and compassion. Okay, so we're building a neural muscle that is inherent within us, to do things. Okay, so finishing. Okay, I think you do need both a program that looks at suffering and healing and get students to engage it in a way that is not only thinking, but about doing things and listening. But they also need to build in, I think, very, specific skills in learning to be still. And learning to be still, not in the face, especially in the face of difficult emotions. So learning to deal with their own dissonance and then turning towards the dissonance of others. So Heather's going to talk about art, but this is a wonderful display of artwork done by first-year students. Can you do something that embodies your understanding of the humanities, okay, and its relevance to health and yourself? So these are wonderful things. And then the breath is just wonderful. The miracle of mindfulness comes from the miracle of connecting with the breath. And so, wonderful statement that medicine is most humane of the sciences and the most scientific of the humanities. It can be measured. And last but not least, thank you all for being here to be present. and for walking the journey, which never ends. But if we do it together, it'll be wonderful. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you so very much. I'll
Yeah.
see.
Okay.
Just fabulous. Why don't we take just a quick 5 minutes for questions? We can come back for more questions later and have a cup of tea. I think we all need a cup of tea.
Yeah.
I do. I speak for myself. So just let's have some questions if that's okay.
Oh, questions.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine.
Any like to make a comment or a question is fine. Just one, John.
Good morning, welcome to Adelaide.
Yeah,
I'm a visitor here myself, but I've spent more than half my life here now, so I'm partly a local. I was brought up, fortunately, from my point of view, in the 1970s in my undergraduate study, when living in the now was very much a phrase that was bandied about. So I have some sympathy with what you presented. It's been my observation that fear is the basis for a great deal of the antagonism towards the idea of living in the now. People are frightened of it. Do you have any comments to make about how one might respond to people who feel threatened by the idea of mindfulness and listening deeply?
I think, when in the Buddhist teaching they say whatever aversions or whatever things that turn up is due to ignorance. I think the fear arises out of not understanding, not being clear of things. And so I take people through to very simple exercises of what we did, to be here and present and really to find peace and comfort. And there are many opportunities. So the other day I had to take a class. It was supposed to be a class at, I think, 11:30. And I realized the students had been sitting in the lecture together since 8:30. When I came in, they were upset. There was a lot of emotions and everything. And I just sensed that. And I sense it in my body. I can see it in them. And I just say, Ding, are you here? You're here in body, but you're not here in your mind. Can we do something to bridge that? So I got them into the breathing. I think maybe I see less of fear. I see aversion. I see more of an aversion. I like or I don't like. So maybe that manifests as fear, but there's a liking and a disliking. Like and disliking. So I don't really have a good answer for you. Yeah, but it's being open and embodying what you're trying to teach yourself by saying is that this is also a difficult moment for me. I can see that you guys don't really want to be here. But since that we have shown up for each other, how can we make the best use of showing up? So I think that is very helpful. We have shown up. If we don't show up, nothing happens. Okay.
Could I just briefly add to that comment, John, and the issue we're on, which is, in a sense, as a card-carrying psychologist for my sins, the classical way you train a psychologist is to be, in a sense, that blank slate, to not show anything of yourself. And I think there's a fear in the helping professions generally that if you do open up, if you do get engaged, if you are in the present moment, you will be burnt out, you will be hurt, you won't be an effective person. There is that unspoken, I think, fear. Yet what I've picked up from you today is the best kind of articulation I've heard to date of how it's the other way around. That if you do the work on yourself first, and if you remain present, there's a less likelihood of burning out.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Would you mind just introducing yourself for those here?
Hi, my name's Jasmine. I'm from the Royal Adelaide Hospital. I'm a researcher there with the Ear, Nose and Throat Department. I came today to hear more about these concepts because I've been reading about both of these and trying to understand on a deeper level. And I'm really enjoying what I'm hearing today. I just wanted to briefly comment about what you just mentioned then. And both of you, what I noticed in your answers is you use the phrase being present. And I think in my interactions with people who have had an aversion to the phrase being in the now, sometimes it's just the language you use. And if you change it to being in the present, they can identify because they fear losing the past, which informs their present, and they fear not planning for the future. So I think that just the term in the now can be off-putting, although it's important to understand that concept. Being present, like you both said, often people change their reaction.
Yeah, I think there's also nothing wrong by saying we need to plan for the future, and there's some things in the past we remember. But a lot of the time, when we are here to do certain things, to pay attention, we don't do that. It's because of the aversion. We don't really want to be here, and if I think of the future, I go back to the past. But you're already here and shown up, then you have got to make meaning. You've got to be open up to whatever that's around. You know, so when all the thing that went wrong, I was very thankful that we still had the lighting, the air conditioning, the crowd was very, in the moment, and then we did it. Yeah. Okay.
Well, welcome back. Let's turn our attention, if you like, not completely away, but parallel from listening to seeing and observing. And I've had the good fortune in the 5.5 odd years I've been in Adelaide to meet up with Uncle Lewis and learn so much from him. So he's going to kick us off for the next 20 minutes or so and give us some of his thoughts and wisdom from a NGARA perspective.
There you go. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, Uncle.
Okay. Right. I should start off when I was about 3 years of age. My grandmother sat me on a log and she told me a story. And halfway through I did like all kids, "Gran, can I ask you a question?" And she said, "Tut-tut!" And she just walked away like that and left me sitting on the log. And as a 3-year-old, I sat there bewildered. I thought, what's going on? Why is my grandmother leaving? She gives you all these thoughts. Second day, she does the same again. I do the same thing. But the third day, I bit my tongue and listened. And when I finished the story, I thought, wow. And then years later, you read, "He who learns to listen gets accelerated learning." And we have a fanciful word in our language that says this as well. Our word for listening is Yuri Nganindi. And that means inquiring with the ears, deep listening. It's really a fanciful term. And that's what our people teach you, all the senses. And we should go to the next one. It's how we learn observation. And I've done this for 30 years around schools. I used to go and visit schools and bring out my little bit of string. And people make these little statements to me when they see it. "Oh, you play games, do you?" And I think to myself, games? Haven't they heard learn through play? And so they demean the very thought of the string. But the string's only a vehicle, because our people say this, they have a fanciful little saying about the string. It's not what you use, it's the way you use what you got that makes the difference. It's the difference you're searching for in life. And what's the difference? If I show you how you learn, then you might see the difference. If I teach you by instructions, I say put the right in front of the left, put it in your mouth, left over right, and go between your finger. Hand of the ball game, you solved a problem, that's all the string's about, move on. But our people say, no, that's not what it's about at all. They say, let's change the rules. You watch what I do, and then see if you can do it after. And then they teach you things like this. And they said, now you've done that, do this. And you say, what's that all about? Well, maybe I'll get Lee to hold up his finger like that. Now, I've got your finger, haven't I?
Yeah.
And you sure?
Sure.
Where is it? Now, that's the ultimate. And why is that the ultimate? Because, see, I had to play with string for months on end and years on end, and then I get to that stage where I can do that from that finger. But see, the secret is this. I learnt that off a movie, and the movie's called The Horse Whisperer. Robert Redfern does that in the film. I watch the film, it's up on the screen there. I can't talk to him and he can't talk to me, but he can't stop me doing what he does. Because I have observation skills. I can watch every movement he does. Then I can watch what you do. I can watch machines. I can watch the environment, because I know how to observe and pick up all the pointers that are going on. And a lot of people don't get the difference. And yet our people teach you that with a bit of string. And shows you how learning is different from different peoples and how we can gain from each other. And maybe I should get on to a few little extra steps that I've taken in life. And I find it fascinating, the journey you go on with these sort of things. I'm walking down Rundle Moor 30 years ago, or more. An Aboriginal bloke came up to me. He was from the north. I didn't know him. He didn't know me. He just walked up to me. He knew by looking at me, because he could observe and he could see into me. He knows who I am. And he said to me, "You live in rainbow country." And I said, "Do I?" And then he just walked on and left me. And it took me 30 years to find this rainbow country that I lived in. Because I'm in the Adelaide railway station, and I look on the ground, and there's this artist put all these coloured sands on the ground. And he made 3 carpets, one all green, but different shades of green. 4 by 8 squares. And these squares are that big. And he just put it down with his hand like that, with the different shades of green. Then he had a brown carpet. Then he had a multicoloured one. And I'm staring at this, and a bloke come up and he said, "You want to meet the artist?" I said, "Yes." So he introduced me to him. His name was Nicholas Lang. He came from Germany, and I said to him, "What part of Germany come from?" And he said, "A.K.A." I said, "Oh, that's where they have the Passion Play." "Oh," he said, "a learned man." I said, "No, I read a bit." And anyway, there's an interesting thing about, does anyone know about A.K.A? Well, there you go. And I said to him, "What part in the play did you play?" He said, "I played Christ." And I thought, wow. There's a man coming from one spiritual country to another. And says, fascinating. And I thought, he's picked on this search. I said, "How did you get to these colours?" He said, "I was looking for coloured ochre." And he found our spot about coloured ochre. We got 4 coloured ochres in the one spot. But he said, I couldn't find the rainbow there. But he said, and anyway, it's fascinating. Next door to the ochre, there's the sands. And there's every colour in the rainbow. And he wrote a book about it. The most colourful sands in the world, and 250 shades. And they're here in South Australia, and I went and visited the site then later on. I thought, wow. And then he gave me a picture with all the colours laid out. And he had this little tin gadget he did it with. He just poured it through it, randomly separated the sands into all these different colours. And I thought, wow. And that's the journeys we go on. We walk our country to gain in knowledge or strength, and then we find our places, because that's the part of the dreaming. Know your own country, love it, don't envy anyone else's, because you have these beauty spots. If you look for them, and you'll find them. And that's what we do. We search. I find the ochre, I find the sand, I found all these beautiful spots, the springs, and I've even found the spring in the sea. And you think, wow, it's lovely to see that. And you see, I've seen the sea separated by 1 inch of stone. And I had to jump this ledge, and the old bloke said, "See that? And there's this little cup of water in here on a ledge, and the sea's lapping against this little inch of rock." And then you can put your hand and drink the water and go, wow, what a sight and what a spot. I love my country. And so you see these spots, and why should I worry about anyone else's? They could love theirs, but that's the beauty of the dreaming. A lot of people don't know that. It says, love your own country, not be envious of anyone else. So you're learning all these philosophical factors. And a lot of people don't know that about Aboriginal culture. Really, you're religious people. You're like the Amish. You have no possessions. You have no worldly goods. You live on today, not tomorrow. And that's all you're concerned with. You live a philosophical life. And people don't get it. Because that's what the German missionaries found when they came here. Because they asked us, well, not me, they asked the old people, have you got a word for a creator? And they said, yes, it's Pinkalingala. Well, we'll see what it says to them in reverse. What the hell are you doing here? What can you teach us that we don't already know? And that's why even the churches smile about it now, because I've been to the Christian Jewish Association. They said, what was God doing in this country before we arrived? See, and that's the interesting part about this country. It's a very spiritual place, so it's a very unusual place. And now people talk about this. You walk this country and you get affected like we did, because it's not just ordinary. It's a very old country. See, because the land in the west is same age as the planet, which is very unusual for a country to have that. And so I've grown up with all these things all my life, and you just go, wow, and every day is an adventure. And so to see all these wonderful things. But then I should tell you some of the things we look at. Every day when I get up, I look at the two peaks of the mountain that lies here. That's Urubilla. The two ears of the giant that lies there. And why the two ears? Because the two reminds you to think twice. Because our people says, don't think once, it's limiting. And I think, wow. And then they give us the liberty of looking at our language, and it's in this book here. And I get fascinated reading this book. Because every time I come across a word, it's something fanciful. Something you'd never dream is in this book. It's just full of so much information, it's bewildering to me. That there's the book written by the German missionaries. They talked to three old gentlemen that was equally skilled as them. And you can see that by the word exchange. And so I'll go through some of the words and show you how we can work it out backwards, because our people give us the liberty to do that. They say, oh, I'll give you all the words. Because really what they do is they play a game with us. And we know that when we're growing up, they play riddles. And I'll give you one to start out with. They say it to you. I went into the woods and I got it. I looked for it and couldn't find it, so I came out with it. And so that's a hell of a riddle. But what it is, it's a splinter. Because you go into the woods and the little wood sticks in your foot, you look for it, you can't find it, so you come out with it. So there's the sort of things you grow up with, the riddles. And they say life's a riddle, solve it. So they give you all these little problems to solve every day, all day. And so then you solve the thinking business. Why are they talking about this two-ness? What's that all about? Because we talk like, if I talk to one person, I've got to say, Nina Money, how are you? If I talk to two, Niwa Money, how are you two? Nah Money, how are you all? So we go one, two, many. So they not only tell you to think, they put it in the language and make you do it. So they're teaching you subtly all the time. They're saying, I'll get you to do these things in spite of yourself. And then you think, how do they hit upon this? Then you suddenly realise the word for the brain gives you the guide to how they did it. The word for the brain in our language is muka muka. But what's muka? Muka's oval. And so they're telling you in a breath that the brain is made up of two hemispheres, two ovals. So they're saying if the brain thinks twice, we should too. And then they dream up a fanciful word, NGARA, expressing the notions of individuality and reciprocity twice both one another difference. You think, wow, that's a mouthful and a hell of a philosophical thinking. And you think, what's that all about? That's why Aboriginal culture is very difficult, even for us to follow, because it's dealing with two things all the time. And you think, how can you deal with two things? And one of the things that tricks people is this, when I say to them, there's two truths. And they go, what? How can there be two truths? Well, I said, there's the truth in the story and the truth of the story. It's irrelevant what you read, fiction or fact, you can gain from both, as long as you know the difference. There's many truths, but that's why people have different philosophies. They have their truths, we have our truths, you make up your own truth. So there's all this mixtures of truths. So we grow up knowing what truth's about. Yet how many people get told what truth is? We do. So we learn a lot of lessons, because our people were educators. They educated males for 25 years. 5 initiation, rigorous on education. And it showed up when the Germans taught our kids on the banks of the Torres in 1839 to 1845. They taught them in our language. That's why they wrote this book. The 3 old blokes saw the sense of it. And not only that, Ishimaya Pinner taught in the classroom with them. Because they knew that they were going to give this as a legacy to us. And they gave us all the examples in there, and they showed us how to do things. Because people think, how can you make up new words? Like one bloke said, how can you make up a word from computer? It's easy, I said. Mukakando, lightning brain, it's easy. So we describe what we're looking at. And they give you examples in the book how to do it. They say buckandy. Buckandy is to cut. Buckety buckety is the thing that cuts knife. We only have to put "ity" on the verb and makes it a noun, which is very clever. And so you can see all this fanciful stuff we've got endings that make sense, because here there's the string, and people say, oh, if you play with string, that's all you can do. But see, our suffix tells us we can go from further than that, and the suffix we've got is nendi. And nendi says becoming, transformation from one state to another. So the word tells us we can do it. So when you say night came, that confuses the hell out of us. We said, how did it come? Bus, train, car? What are you talking about? See, it prompts a question. We can't do that. We have to describe what we're looking at. We say, Nultanendi, it's becoming dark. As easy as that. And so we describe what we're looking at. We're not allowed to prompt a question because that's not a part of our life. Our life is we have to ask the questions of ourselves and solve the problem for ourselves. They give you the vehicle, they give you the information, and they say, work at it. And so we get the fanciful words that they throw at us again. And so we've got all the concepts in this dictionary. Yarakatata, it's at random. And how do they come at that? They look at trees and say they're scattered without design at random. When they see people growing trees in rows, they think, what are they on about? Nature doesn't do that. What are they doing? And so we look at the funny side of that, and so you can see the difference of viewpoints. And then we've got even the thoughts of multiplication. In the book it tells you, Yerabula times, 4 times. You don't know even that's an exponentiation because they're not there to tell us all this. But so they've got all this in-depth stuff in the book, and you go, wow. Even it's got stuff about the stars in there. Because I got amazed that I turned this page and I thought, wow, this Y words again. And now is it in 1969, John Wheeler looked at the stars collapsing and formed dark holes. Our dictionary was written in 1840. It's got Urakawi goes to the dark spots in the Milky Way. I thought, you can learn from anyone. See, and I thought, how in-depth is that? They saw the dark, because they look at 2 things. See, because most people look at the stars. Our people look at the dark spots. The 2 things, the balance all the time. We have 2 moieties, Mathuri and Karawu. We have women's business and men's business. All the time we're dealing with 2 things. And what's that do for you? That gives you a lateral. And that's why I was an apprentice in the railways. I was a fitter and machinist. And every bloke I came to, he had an invention. And I thought, why is that? And you notice about Australia, we got more inventions per square foot. And you think, why is that? And they all say the same thing. I talk to Aboriginal. And he gives you a lateral. And the classic is our bloke David Unipen. Look how many laterals he gave people. He said things like this. If you concentrate light, it could be useful. Now we've got lasers. He said if you put 2 boomerangs together and put them on top of a vehicle and spin them, they should be able to lift. And he had a patent in for that, lifting by propulsion. So that's a helicopter. So he'd give people lots of thoughts. And so he was very deep in his thinking. And see, and that's what our people do all over. Even I did it myself once. I was sitting on a bench in baseball, and the bloke sitting next to me said, Lou, he said, I've always wanted to make a baseball pitching machine. I said, I know how to do that. He said, how would you know? Well, I said, I went to America and I saw it in a book. And see, we remember these irrelevant things, you know. We just look at a picture and we think, oh, right, I see that. Anyway, so we'll make it. And so we started to make it, and the one I saw was an old-fashioned thing, and he said, I know what to do now, we'll make the latest one. So he saw it down the street, because he didn't know what to look at. So we made the machine for $200. I made the spindles and the brackets. He was a boilermaker, he made the plates. We put them on the plates with the 2 tyres around and spun them, and the ball pitched. And we thought, wow. So it was that good he bought the new machine, because $1,500, because had variable speed motors and you could do more with it. But anyway, when I'm in his shed, he's fixing bats for baseball to repair them. And I said, where'd you learn that? He said, Aboriginal. I thought, that's twice. But then he took me out the back and he threw this anchor out. He said, pull that, and it came out easy. And he said, try this one. I said, gee, that works. He said, yeah. He said, I worked up about the angle. So there he got 2 things from Aboriginal, and he did something himself. And so you can see the beauty of changing thoughts and laterals, how it helps you. And so you can see that in this country, the amount of inventions we got is just mind-boggling. I mean, I just get flabbergasted reading them when I used to collect these inventions. I don't know if everyone's heard of Harold Gatty. Now, Harold Gatty was an Air Force pilot. The Yanks picked him up pretty quick. They got him to teach Air Force pilots in America. They gave him a DFC, which is incredible, because normally you don't give medals to other nations. But that man invented 3 things. He invented the artificial horizon for planes, he had a ground speed indicator, and an aeronautical chronometer. Not only that, he wrote a book, How to Survive in a Raft at Sea. So he was, and not only that, he could fly over any country and know where he was, because he used to practice that in his holidays. He used to fly over all the countries around the world and to see that what the ground was like underneath to know where he was. And he used to teach pilots about that, how you could look at trees and see which way the wind's blowing, and how the smaller growth on the tree is where the wind's coming from, whereas the larger growth is on the leeward side, sort of thing. So he worked that all out. So the amount of inventions I couldn't believe. We invented the seismograph, the lung machine, for all that sort of chest inventions. Then there's Michelle invented a thrust, and I saw that on the ship I was on. I thought, but this is never ending, the amount of inventions, because of that additive. That's thinking twice, because no one even thinks to look at a didgeridoo. Didgeridoo is only a hollow bit of log. But what do we do that's different to anything else? Everyone has wind instruments. We invent circular breathing, 1 step extra. See, people look at the spear. Most people grab it in the middle and throw it. We have a woomer, extend the arms, leverage greater, faster with a spear. Boomerang, throwing stick. We get it to return. So every time you're thinking, how can you do that different? How can I make it better? What other thoughts you got? And I even get tickled when I watch bush mechanics. There's a carburettor, doesn't get supplied with petrol. The petrol pump's broken. And the Aboriginal looks and he says, where's a petrol pump in the car, or where's a pump in the car I could use? And he says, I know, windscreen wipers. So he fills instead of with water in the windscreen wiper bottle, he puts petrol, takes the hose and plugs into the carburettor and gets home. Because he used the water pump in the windscreen wiper to do this. He thinks, where else? What else can I do? How can I make it work? So you can see that sort of thinking is useful, because that's how you have to be when you're in the bush. There's no one there to help you. You've got to think, how am I going to get out of this situation? What can I do? And so it learns you to do all those little in-depth things. Now probably I should get on to medicine. And the one that really tickled me in this book, see, it's got so much information, it's just mind-boggling. And so in this little booklet, it's got something about medicine, which really blew me away. It says, if I can find it, it says, the spleen is fastened to the stomach. And I thought, wow, that's a heck of a statement for a little bloke wandering around in the bush. The spleen. And so I talked to a bungalow man from New South Wales, and I said, our people knew where the spleen was. He said, that's funny you should say that. He said, I went to a court case in Alice Springs about that. I said, you're joking. He said, no. He said, this white woman came up to the police and said, that Aboriginal man assaulted me on the Todd River. And so when they went to court, the judge said to the bloke, did you assault this woman? He said, no, Your Honour, but I can tell you this, she had a damaged spleen before she came to the river. Yes, right, quite true, quite true. Could you explain that to the court? He said, no, Your Honour, but an elder in the village can. So the elder came in and he asked the woman to walk across the room. And then he asked her to speak. Then he explained to the court how she spoke and how she walked that indicated she had a damaged spleen. The woman broke down, admitted her husband belted her up, so the man was let off because of her knowledge of the spleen, which is rather unusual. Because how people learn to look at you and see how you walk. I used to do that when I was coach of football teams. I'd watch the players and I thought, gee, that kid's he's hurt his ankle. So I'd say, get him off, because I know when you're at your ankle, you've got to get them off their feet, because there'll be 6 weeks to mend an ankle, because you know the timeline. You don't want to lose your player that long. And so you're watching every player all the time. You're watching how they hurt and whether they're physically fit and something's wrong with them. And so it's useful to observe. And so I found I could do that. I could get them off and get ice on their ankle and get their legs up and get them off their feet and let it mend at the moment instead of letting them run around and injure it more. And so it's very useful to be able to do those sort of things. So it's transferable to a lot of different areas. So you can see I've grown up with a wealth of knowledge around me. My aunt on the mission, she was a master psychologist, and I was very privileged to meet so many wonderful people to show me a way to go and how to think and how to use all your senses and to reason and reason well. Thank you. Oh, okay.
I've been listening to this fellow for about 5 years. Listening to you for about 5+ years now, and I'm always learning something new. Always, every time. Fabulous. Any questions or comments for about 5 minutes, then we'll keep going and call you back?
No, that's good.
No, too easy. Look, John's got one.
Thanks. I should have said John Gray. I work at SAMRI at the Aboriginal Research Unit there. And I always have questions for Uncle Lewis every time I see him. Like Dennis, I've been listening to him for quite a few years and I always learn something new. But something has been bothering me, which you might have an observation to make, and perhaps the other two speakers as well. I am very fond of the country I come from, which is the countryside just north of London, where I grew up as quite a wild child who was able to wander wherever he wanted to go. But my daughter's born here in Adelaide, so she doesn't have country in England. As far as she's concerned, she's from Adelaide. And one of the things that's been provoking my mind is, what do we offer as a society to Australian-born children who are not Aboriginal in terms of understanding country?
Yeah, well, I think they've got to do the same as what we do. They've got to walk the country and find out about it. So that's how you learn about it. That's how we do it, and I think everyone should do that, because if you don't do that, what are you on about? See, it's like Lee says, you live in the moment, and that's the moment you should live in. Walk the country and look at the beauty spots, look at your hills, find out about the stories about your hills. Because I found it was an interesting story. I took a busload of tourists down our Jilbrookie Trail on the beachfront, and they all took it in turn, sit next to me, and the woman said to me, "You say the hills is a giant?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Do you really believe that's a person lying there?" I said, "No, I don't." She said, "What?" She said, "Why are you telling that story?" I said, "Because I believe in the philosophy. If it's a person, you'll protect it. If it's a bit of dirt and earth, you'll dig it up. You won't care about it." So it's a different view of the world you've got to have. That's all it is, and that's what you've got to teach people. See, why teachers is a bit of dirt? It's not. It's a living entity, and we should protect it and live with it, because that's our philosophy. We'll have a joint relationship between the earth and us, which is a different viewpoint. And that's what we have to teach people, because you can't keep going the same way. It's only a bit of dirt. You can dig it up, throw it away. It's something you can use as a commodity, but I don't think you should do that. You should protect your country and look after it. It'll look after you.
Yeah. Just to follow from that, Uncle, and to John, the way that our children imprint on this country is really important. Whether they're Aboriginal children, Torres Strait Islander children, or other children, the movement through the spirit of this country in their physical and metaphysical way, they imprint, and we all imprint, and that creates that sense of belonging. We may have our ancestors buried here, and that connects us very strongly to country, and Jukapa connects us very strongly to country, but it does not exclude other people and other people's imprints and their movement in this world.
Very true.
What's the last question?
Okay. No, just a comment about whether people who live in a modern society can understand about tradition and culture. I think it's by having our senses all open, not just the thinking, but the feeling, the seeing, the touching, the smelling. So even in the city, there are many things that remind us of nature. There's a tree out there. And when you do things mindfully, like walking, you begin to see things you would otherwise miss. You see a flower, you see soil, you look at the tree, you come down to the bark, and things that you eat in front of you. So there's mindful eating. You think about, where does this food come from? You know, it appears to us as though it has fallen down from the sky, but there's a lot of things that have gone into it. The sun, the sky, the rain, the people making the seeds, and so all these things can come in if we're mindful in the moment and allowing the sense doors to open rather than just a thinking brain. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
No, actually, I'll just put it there.
Just while we're bringing up Heather's PowerPoint and getting her lapel mic fixed, I might just say that it was fantastic. Dave and I, as I mentioned, were at the University of Melbourne a couple of weeks ago, and we had the chance to visit the Ian Potter Art Museum and see the works there and see what Heather did with these students. So it's a fantastic, and I think there's a lot to learn there. Dr. Heather Gaunt, thanks.
Thank you, Dennis. Is that okay in volume? Can you hear me? Thank you. Thank you, Uncle, for the welcome. And thank you, Auntie, for your wonderful, wonderful talk. And thank you, LC, for your talk too. I'd like to pay my respects to the elders of this land, past and present, and to Dennis and to the Poche Centre for the privilege, the great privilege of coming here and participating in this seminar today. I feel privileged on many levels, which I hope I can touch on a bit in the talk today. But given the context of the narratives and the personal connections that we're talking about, I don't want to launch into the standard academic presentation that I would normally do without first saying something about myself, because I think it's the right place to do that. I'm an Anglo-Celtic Australian, and yet I feel I have a strong sense of belonging to the country that I grew up in. And talking to Auntie last night, and the questions we just had then made me realise that it's okay for me to voice that feeling, because it's hard to feel comfortable that I can say that this is where I belong when I'm an Anglo-Celtic Australian, and yet I feel I belong there so much. So my country that I grew up in is the Warby Ranges up near Wangaratta in northeast Victoria, and I was born near Bright, which is closer towards the mountains. And I love that country so much, and it has had a big impact, I realise, as I get older on me in terms of what I've done with my life and my career. And part of that ties into what we're talking about today in terms of observation and being aware of place. Because as I grew up, I loved to draw, and my connection with my place, which was around Glenrowan and up at Bright and in the mountains in the northeast, was through looking and drawing. And I spent a lot of time, even into my university years. I went to Melbourne to go to university, but I would always get on the train and go back and do a lot of drawing. And to me, it has impacted greatly on who I am. And we were talking last night over dinner around granite as a rock, and Mount Buffalo, that I love, is made of granite. And we talked about our different experiences with this type of rock and how important it was to us. So I wanted to share that with you, because it was really the beginning of my journey, where now I'm a passionate teacher using art to practice observation, but so many other things as well. But I see my most important role in my current position at the University of Melbourne is actually as a collaborator. So I feel that I have access and I can offer this resource, which is the Ian Potter Museum of Art that you see there at the University of Melbourne, into lots of different teaching areas. That's my role. I'm tasked with making the museum and its exhibitions and its contents useful across all different disciplines. And I've been doing this job for a couple of years, and before that I actually worked more in the curatorial and collection management side. So for me, this is a new area, moving into teaching and engagement like this. immensely rewarding and exciting and endlessly fulfilling. And I feel very privileged to be doing it and to work with the great variety of people, because I'm privileged in the sense that I get to engage with academics and their students from across all these different disciplines and have insights into the very different ways that people approach information, approach seeing and listening and looking, depending on where they come from as individuals, depending on their disciplinary or their encultured learning. Very, very different insights into people. And to come back to think that I use this resource of the Art Museum to make these connections. Now, I'm deliberately going to overwhelm you with text for a few slides. It's very deliberate. You don't need to read it all, but one of the ways that I first started to think about how I was going to effectively engage the university students across different disciplines with the Art Museum was to go to the graduate attributes of the different faculties and departments and courses, and to read lots of different course descriptions and to see the sort of core ideas that are coming out in different areas that need addressing. And over that first year of the work that I was doing, I came to see that the Art Museum was a place in which we could really tackle core ideas and sort of these sort of graduate attributes. And if I've just highlighted a few there in red to give you a sense. I don't need to read them out, and I don't think I need to articulate to you the connections with the humanities, because in fact, again, it's terrific to come at the end of this morning of talking, because what I'm saying is really just now a demonstration of the practice of the ideas that we've heard about. These are the different attributes under patience: communication, understanding human relationships, appropriate diagnosis, differential diagnosis, multiple points of view, ethics, and effective feedback, again, communication, and teamwork. And diversity, appreciation of different cultures. We're very lucky at the University of Melbourne. We have one of the richest art collections of any university within Australia, and the Ian Potter Museum of Art, where I work, has, we look after the whole University of Melbourne art collections, and we have a beautiful building in which we display parts of those collections and we exhibit the collections. We also bring in exhibitions externally. We create exhibitions of our own. We work from collections that range from classics and antiquities, archaeological collections, through ethnographic collections that have been acquired through our departments of anthropology through the 20th century and given for us to hold and manage. Rich colonial Australian art, white Australian collections, contemporary work, international design. We've really got this fabulous body of material that we can build our programs upon. I would like this to be a really dark room and that this would be a life-size image, because to me, we've gone from text and words and so much of what happens in terms of talking and writing. You walk into an art museum and you're in a different place altogether. So this is a group that I taught on, what's today, Friday, Wednesday. And they're second year biomedicine students in a special program, a chancellor's sort of mentorship program, where these are the 99.9%ers, the students who are really outstanding achievers and who are being mentored to think very broadly and richly about their work. And as Marilee Squillerman, who's there on the right, is liking to do, to open their minds to things beyond biomedicine. What else can they enrich their world with? So we took them up to see this wonderful artwork that Dennis saw when he came, and David, when he came to the Ian Potter Museum of Art a few weeks ago, which is by the Australian Indigenous artist Tony Albert, a wonderful young man who won this, the winning award in this exhibition that the work is shown in, which is the Basil Sellers Art Prize. This exhibition is about the connection between sport and art and involves 16 contemporary artists developing ideas around that. But Tony's work won it on this theme of racism in sport. That's Tony. And he says, "Despite the challenges I face as a black man, I will never give up on the fight against racism. There are so many heroes who stand up for our people, and it is those heroes, people like Gordon Bennett, Adam Goose, Nicky Winmar, who inspire me to carry on. His artwork that you can see behind there is a really rich and evocative and interesting compilation of lots of images and text, and making lots of connections that Tony builds upon in this work around racism and sport, and specifically tracing a narrative over 20 years to see how well or effectively or ineffectively the AFL in particular is managing the issue of racism within its particular sport. And Tony speaks very passionately about this work, understandably, but also what I find really inspirational about him is his message of positivity in the face of adversity. So his work is around creating a dialogue, making a conversation happen in order to achieve a better future. And it's that sort of thing, that sort of message that I think we can really build upon and extrapolate from within an art museum context. It's a place in which in the university that's separate from all these other teaching spaces, that has a unique environment that you can take students into completely out of context for them and do something new. So what I'd like to do today in the, Dennis, I'll try and be fast, I promise, in the next couple of minutes is just to show you a series of photos that I've taken of some of the students that I've worked with over the last couple of years, and to briefly talk about some of the attributes and skills and states of mind and focus of attention that I work on with them. That said, and I'll try to mention a few of the different courses that I build into, but I want to point out that the work that I do with the students from medicine, dentistry and health sciences, which goes across all of those areas, including sort of physiotherapy and special needs dentistry and different areas of medicine, I also work very broadly across science and engineering and creative writing and classics, all the different subjects. So this is just like a snapshot of what we do, but it is an area that I feel really passionate about because I feel that we are having real world and important outcomes in terms of changing our students' perceptions. And also I think because this student cohort is coming back to, I think, what you were saying, Elsie, potentially quite resistant. I don't mean to stereotype or overly characterise that, because they're not all resistant, but their training will be leading them to think in a certain way. And so it's a really interesting group to work with. So I believe very passionately that the Art Museum has these sort of possibilities for enrichment in these three key areas of sort of an intellectual engagement, but also an emotional engagement, and increasingly I'm seeing a visceral engagement. And I think back to when, as I mentioned to you, as a younger person I did a lot of drawing, and I try to imbibe into the students a sense of that whole body physical connection with what you're looking at. It's sort of my version of deep looking. If you're looking and you're drawing and you're connecting, it's a physical thing. And I notice that when the students are in the gallery and they're describing work, because I get them to engage and speak and to communicate about what they see. They often, if it's the right work and they're suitably engaged, they will be very physical in terms of describing what they're seeing. So there might be, this work here is in fact a very large photograph by Bill Henson, and the figures in the photograph are life-size. And when the med students, for example, a couple of days ago were trying to understand whose limb was whose, because in this image you can't really see with the light. But there's a lot of ambiguity about these two young people in this very dark photograph. And they physically mirror what's happening in the photo. And I think just already getting out of their own heads and into mirroring the bodily actions of these people in the photographs is moving into that connection into something else. So states of attention and states of mind is how I'm increasingly thinking I'm working. And these are all the points that I'm going to go through slide by slide, but I just thought I'd put them here in one go. So essentially I'm going to look at three areas that I think I work on most effectively in this space. Slow and long and careful looking. And as I'm talking, I'd love you to think back to what we've also heard today and to think of the connections with other ways of articulating these essentially same concepts. Self-awareness and empathy. and a new context to think about professional skills and experiences. And for Melbourne University, where we are very much focused on cross-disciplinary and interdisciplinary learning, and our new breadth, well, not so new anymore, our new breadth curriculum, which is around introducing students to subjects and modes of thinking outside of what they think they're there for. The science students also studying languages or studying creative arts. I think that sort of multidisciplinarity is very effectively practiced in the Art Museum. Just briefly, I based this work, particularly in the medical and health sciences, on programs that I was privileged to go and observe in the US last year. So Harvard and Yale really pioneered the work using visual art resources to practice visual observation skills specifically. Yale more around a quite sort of scientific model of observation, objective and subjective modes of looking and interpreting. At Harvard, it's more around sort of building meaning as a group. I'll talk more about that in a little. But there's a really good body of research and writing and some demonstration that there are skill increases in this area in terms of the richness and the accuracy of observations that come out of practicing these skills for med students in art museum environments. And in general, this study that the US Department of Education did a few years back, saying that compared with peers who didn't participate in the program in the art museum, those who did showed statistically significant improvement in 5 out of 7 thinking skills, associating, comparing, flexible thinking, and most strongly in observing and interpreting. And to me also, one of the great advantages of the art museum is that the students come in with, in most cases, equal unfamiliarity with the environment and the content, which means that we can start on a very level playing field. And when I'm doing programs where I'm mixing students from different cohorts or different levels, that's also really apparent and very refreshing. So everybody comes in equally unfamiliar. There's that sort of dissonance and challenge that allows you to be unsettled and to have to move into a new way of thinking. But you support that by demonstrating and articulating that there isn't any right or wrong answer in this environment, that in fact it's a place where you can think creatively and no one's going to come down and say, you got it wrong. It's actually just use your powers of observation, be in the present, look and share, and you can't get it wrong. We're just going to practice other ways of thinking. And for me, I love the fact that I always, in the medicine, dentistry, health sciences areas, I always teach these things collaboratively. So I don't go in there pretending that I can, well, setting myself up for the med students to say, I'm going to teach you something that you really need to know to become a great doctor. They're going to go, well, you're an art historian, we're in an art museum. Whereas if I go and deliver this program, having developed a specific seminar strategy each time, it's sort of bespoke sort of teaching, with a clinical teacher who I have collaborated with and we've developed the ideas, then it's a very different scenario. Then we are 2 experts in our fields sharing ideas, demonstrating practically that this is not only possible but necessary to come to something new. But for me it's a great privilege because I have to go out there, I have to make sure I understand enough about the context that they need to learn about. So I have to do a fair bit of work to keep up to date in all these different disciplines. But also just to learn about different ways of teaching and have access to these different students. It's wonderful. So I'll try and whip through these slides. So this was a biomedical honours year group. We came in, they had their first experience of their honours year was at the Art Museum. This particular 2.5-hour seminar with Professor Gary Anderson and Professor Ross Vlahos, we chose to focus specifically on the observation skills. The students went in, I demonstrated close observation and articulation and clarity of description. It was very scientific mode, but in this different context. And the students were assigned an artwork each and they had to look at it for 15 minutes. And then we went turn by turn and they had to describe it effectively and clearly and I'm not looking for art sort of words, I just want them to be able to communicate effectively about something that's unknown, and potentially giving them those tools and the confidence that they can do that. If they don't know about something, they can still talk about it, they can still share information. There was a couple of PhD physics students in another group who were describing those two works in the far back corner of the room, and it was fabulous because they were so out of their comfort zone, and yet they were so clever, they just did it beautifully, but it was useful for them as well. Differentiating between objective and subjective modes of interpretation. This to me was where the very beginning of this work that I started doing in the Art Museum, and I think now I'm seeing so many other things that we can really do, but this was the start of it, getting them just to try and separate their inferencing or their diagnosing from just looking carefully. And it's actually sometimes a very hard skill for them to do. So you have to model it well, and then they practice. And as we go from pair to pair over, say, 2 hours, they share ideas and they come to become more comfortable in the process. And after they've done clear objective descriptions, then they're allowed to interpret the work, and they really enjoy it. It's actually, sometimes it feels like there's a hunger for that sort of humanistic connection through being allowed to interpret in this type of context. Persistence in the visual search. It's a really good skill to just have to really look and keep looking. It's a joy, but it's also a skill. And the morning before yesterday, I was teaching veterinary science students, specifically in the area of radiography. So I had a clinician who teaches them about radiographic skills, and this was an off-site, my first off-site pilot with these. So I used Renaissance prints, feeling that there was a similarity of content and the type of image that they were having to practice on with the radiographs. And I also deliberately chose some images that had animals in them just to make that bit of a connection. It was fantastic. We had 16 volunteers signed up within a few hours of us putting out the call, and we did this seminar for 3 hours. And I just had an email feedback this morning from one of the students saying, it's fantastic, we have to do, really recommend that you do this as part of the curriculum. Because what we do with working with the artworks, and then for the final half hour of the session, we embedded that learning back into what they needed to know with the radiographs. So then the teacher put up the slides of comparing spines of dogs, for example, and we talked about having to be really observant about subtle shifts of tone and line and slight differences. Great to practice it in a different area and then transfer. Elsie, I think you'd love this one. Tolerating and managing ambiguity in visual content and the anxiety of not knowing. I mean, this is such a great object. You sort of know and you don't. If you went around the back, it's a standard classical bust. You go around the front and here's this amazing section of rock. All these layers of potential meanings. And as you can imagine, I work either we've got 3 levels of exhibition space, 12 different exhibitions a year. I've got a lot of content that I can work from. So you choose the exhibition, or I've got a large teaching room that I can bring works out from the store for specific ideas. Depending on if you want to have a seminar that's focusing on that, I really don't know what this is about, you pull out things like this. Or if it's more about the observation, you can go with your more traditional narrative works to build that meaning upon a work like this. This is one of our most famous works in the university collection, William Strutt's Bushrangers, Victoria, Australia, 1852. And this is a fun one to work with, and I've got it here for the awareness of the role that prior learning and prior experience play, because the first time I did this with a palliative care clinician, Dr. Natasha Michael, and we described the content. And Dr. Michael has worked in all sorts of places internationally, but she was relatively new to Australia. So while some of the students were able to instantly or rapidly infer that this was probably going to be an Australian scene, and probably summer, and make some inferences because of where they'd grown up and what they knew, Natasha used that as an opportunity to talk about how, well, for her, those things are not obvious. She couldn't bring that learning to her interpretation. So as we teach, we're always finding those striking moments to alert students to what's happening, to make sure they're aware of what's happening in their thinking and in their teaching. So self-awareness and empathy, reflexivity in thinking and looking at the world through other people's eyes. These are med students a couple of days ago, fifth-year med students, who, in this case, looking at some artworks from an Australian artist, John Catapan, who donated a large group of works that he had made as a sort of cathartic process to work through grief when his sister was killed in a car accident. And so he deliberately gave a whole set of works. And what an interesting group to show to the students without any context. So they're trying to draw meaning through the work, and then we gradually add that background, which then enriches a further discussion about this artwork. Intercultural effectiveness through increased awareness and discussions. Just having the opportunity to engage with Indigenous works is a fantastic opportunity to have those conversations, whether it's contemporary art, like Tony Albert's work, or more traditional artwork. This is a show that we had this year. It's actually coming to Flinders University, so you might want to get your students over to look at that one, Dennis. The World is Not a Foreign Land. I'll send you the details of that. I'm not quite sure when it's coming, but it's probably next year or the year after. Considering narratives that are inherent in the content and narratives that we're inclined to create because of our encultured and disciplinary learning. These are special needs dentistry students. One of them grew up in Russia. And he was very resistant to the process and standoffish. What am I doing in this place? And he was assigned this artwork, which is quite challenging, sort of collage fabric piece, which is based on Rembrandt's anatomy lesson. So all sorts of really interesting connections, but disconnections because of the content. In the end, he really enjoyed it, but he didn't like it to start. And this final aspect is thinking about professional skills and experiences. This is one of the very earliest medical groups that, as I said, we tend to have a session in the Art Museum, and then we either build into the session conversations about explicit clinical connections, or we take them off to another room, which is where you see here, where they're looking at their textbooks and saying, okay, we learned about X, Y, Z, about the importance of observation in a clinical palliative care setting. Let's transfer that and practice those observation skills. Or the conversation might be directly thinking about what we've just learnt. Think about what we saw yesterday when we were in the clinic and we were in this room with this patient and their family. What was the family doing? And so then they build a conversation on that and think about how important it is to be alert to all those subtle, but so important in different, particularly palliative care or family medicine scenarios of relationships between family members. I do a fair bit of work with practicing doctors or professional development sort of groups where it's just an opportunity to come, and I send them off on what I call the personal response tour with themed questions, so they actually explore the whole museum and find a work that speaks to them in relationship to the question that I've prompted, and then we go from work to have a share insights, personal insights into the questions, and these are wonderfully powerful and always well received sessions where all I'm doing is opening the environment up, giving them a bit of a structure to have that conversation, and off it goes. And the most recent work that I've been doing in the last month or two is using the artworks as a basis for students to self-select and then build ideas on around ethics. So specifically with a physiotherapy third-year ethics subject, I went off and delivered into their off-site lecture, and we gave them the alternative of either writing their own narrative ethics story from which they then had to write their essay and demonstrate that they understood ethical principles and the literature behind that, or they could come to the exhibition, to the gallery, and specifically I was thinking with the Basil Sellers exhibition because there's that connection with sport again, so there were lots of images of people and interesting physiotherapy type of potential connections. And they just wandered around and chose an artwork and then based their essay on that. A fabulous response. We had something like 50 students in the lecture, and as a hands up, I think about 25 of them said yes, they would come over to the art museum. And I said to them, okay, email me if you'd like me to tour through with you, or you can just do it by yourself. And so I think about 13 or 14 have come through individually, and I've had that wonderful conversation where I say, well, go off and walk around for half an hour and I'll meet you back here and then let's walk and talk. And it's just been fantastic because I've had wonderful comments like, I didn't think I was a creative person, but this has been really amazing. Or in front of Tony Albert's work, I didn't think art could be political. And it's like, wow. So even if that's the only thing that's come out of it, that's good. But that's been enormously rewarding, and I can't wait to see their essays, which are coming in a couple of weeks, because they have to have written a reflective aspect to it about how they have come to their choice of ethical topic. Communication, probably don't even need to say anything that. You can imagine how most of this is the students having to feed back to each other and defend points of view with really unfamiliar material. It's challenging, but not too challenging. It's just right. They are defending their ideas. I love the way they start, once they start interpreting, after they've moved from the close observation phase, and they start to build stories, and they're very, very forthright in saying, no, I don't think this is about, I don't think he's suffering from depression. I think, in fact, that he's had X, Y, Z. So these are special needs dentistry. They leap into making human connections with the artworks in most extraordinarily and with great ease. And even with abstract art, like sometimes I have a variety of work, and we had this really huge Gunter Christmann, quite abstract painting in 2 panels, which the students fearlessly started interpreting in terms of 2 sides of personality, and this one had more lights and this one had more darks. And there's sort of no embarrassment for them. Working with, for example, fine arts students, there's a resistance to doing that because it's seen as a little perhaps too easy or obvious, or maybe it's putting too much of your personal self into something that's supposed to be a professional skill. Whereas for these students, it's just an opportunity to actually talk about things that they need to talk about that they don't usually get to. And finally, it's we're working with fantastic artworks. There's so many opportunities to see a reflection of our progression as humans and our sort of creative and cultural background, which I love to do that. I always take the opportunity to impart little bits of wisdom about the works we've been looking at, and to enrich people about, for example, these really beautiful Renaissance artworks and how our humanity has been depicted in these ways over hundreds of years. And I think that is it. So thank you for listening. I probably went way over time, sorry.
Look, thanks so much, Heather. It's really fantastic. I wish we had a whole day or a couple of days. I've got a request. Because we've got a response from Lambert, and we might lose the satellite, as they say in big television, in about 20 minutes or so. We can probably extend it. Would you mind if we just hold some questions on your piece until the panel, as soon as Lambert's finished? Is that okay?
Absolutely.
If you direct the first questions after Lambert to Heather, and we should get her chance to respond to you. But I think we'll do it all as a panel. Thanks, Lambert. Because I'm keen that we get, for those online, they actually get a chance to hear Lambert and to see the panel, and we'll return to Heather's stuff. Professor Lambert Sherwith, thank you. Would you like...
I could use the lapel mic. I know some of you, I don't know all of you, and you probably don't know me, so please allow me to introduce myself. I'm a father, a husband, a friend, family member. That's who I am. What I do is Professor of Medical Education. And what I love are things like music and language. And from those viewpoints of medical education and my love for music and language, I would like to take some of the lessons that I've learned and give them back to you, and perhaps you might find them useful. And I will do that from a medical education conference context. I'm new in this country. I've only moved to this country 3 years ago. I come from the Netherlands. I'm sometimes jokingly say, if you allow me, I'm an Indigenous person of my own country. So I've never had to deal with the issues that Australia has to deal with. But I've also never had the richness in my country of being allowed to learn from other cultures. The cultures around where I lived were Germany, Belgium, France, and the Netherlands, and they were only slightly different, and not that huge difference. What I've tried to make sense of those differences, and what made me realize today again, is how different the basic values in the cultures in this land are. How one set of cultures tries to control the context and is constantly fighting to manage and to be in control of their surroundings, only to find that we're actually controlled by our surroundings, by emails and all the things, and how the other culture tries to live with their context. And from a medical perspective, one of the things in languages which is strange and which I'm struggling with all the time is that words don't translate. Words translate, but concepts don't translate. A very simple example is a Nobel Prize winner in English is somebody who wins a contest. In German, it's a Nobelpreisträger, somebody who wears the Nobel Prize. It's the honor that's bestowed upon you, which is far more important than the contest that you win. I still have problems wishing people good luck when they face a difficult task. I don't want to wish you good luck. Good luck is outside. It's what happens to you. I want to wish you success. Success is in you. If you face a difficult task, I want to wish you strength, not good luck. And I was thinking about your play of words, mindful. And Jani, who is Dutch as well from a very, very early age, we were thinking, what's the Dutch word for it? It's bedachtzaam. And zaam comes from what you are, what you do. And bedacht is thinking, contemplative, contemplation, reflecting. So the language almost conveys more than we actually... you actually recognize when you're just using a dictionary. So there's differences in basic values, and they are in medical education, and they're creeping into the discourse in medical education. And of course, the first thing is we have been training our medical students to be very competent children, and we're gradually moving into training them to become very competent adults. And adults, people who are able to deal with uncertainty, but who are also able to deal with sometimes managing the context in which the disease of their patients or the illnesses and the suffering occurs, and sometimes allowing that to happen. So finding that delicate balance between intervening and wanting to act and to change, and accepting what's there. Which is at another level, and one of the things that I'm constantly fighting within my university is when they talk about teaching roles or teaching focus roles. Education is not about teaching. Teaching is managing your students and taking your students as unagentic, disempowered subjects of your teaching. Education and learning is incorporating your students in that. And which becomes, in my field, assessment, a very important dilemma, because we can allow our students to learn, and I was taught, I was educated in a problem-based learning program, so self-regulation and self-directedness and my own agency and empowerment in my learning process was important. Yet in assessment, we are still treating our students like little children. We do assessment to our students, We do not allow our students to take control, to take agency in their assessment, which is odd because the moment they graduate, we expect them to take agency in their own professionalisation, continuing medical education and a professional development, as if the diploma somehow is a magic wand that transforms people. And that's certainly something that we're looking for. But one of the issues that's so important in assessment is that we can only assess what people do. Unfortunately, all the development in assessment is focused on what people demonstrate, what they do, even if we look at what they do on a day-to-day basis. And we're still not touching the surface or scratching the surface of assessment, what people are. And I think that's a very wise lesson I've taken, or a very important lesson for me, which I have taken from today. I loved your talk about, basically what I took from it is you cannot not learn. Like you cannot not communicate. There is an impossibility to not learn. It's built in our system. And I come from a very cognitive perspective. It's built into our brains. Our brains are constantly learning. And one of the buzzwords in education, at least in medical education, is self-directed and self-regulated learning. And then the discourse, the discussions is about how do we teach our students to become self-regulated learners. But you've made me aware again that we were born self-regulated learners. I've learned my language self-regulated. I've learned to walk self-regulated. I've learned all the important things in my life in a completely self-directed, self-regulated way. So it's not about teaching students self-regulated learning ability. It's probably giving back self-regulated learning ability to our students, which is a completely different direction for medical education, I think. And then finally, you had another one which was enlightening for me, the story of the truth of the story versus the truth in the story, which made me aware that even as we speak, medical education, despite all the developments, is still very much focused on the factuals. And I don't mean factuals like facts. I mean factual as the translation of the Dutch word zakelijk. We're just going on with business. And we don't use the stories and the narratives to educate our students or to let our students transform in those adult people who are better able to self-regulate their learning, to self-regulate their own development and this evaluation, and who are able to manage uncertainty. Which makes me, and that's where I will finish off with, which makes me aware of that. If you think about philosophy of human ideas, there is a very popular categorization says there are ideas about what is true, and we expect everybody to agree on it, and it should be proven in a hard way. There are ideas about what's right, is where there are schools of thoughts. It doesn't require hard proof, but it requires a plausible argumentation. And there are ideas about what's of value, or what's aesthetic, if you talk about art, but what's of value. And we can all disagree, and there is no hard proof, yet it's very dear to our heart. And medicine is at the crossroads of all three of them. We deal with things that are true and need to be factual and proven. We need to deal with things that are just and fair and the right thing. And we need to deal with things which are completely uncertain, which are of value. And the Germans have a nice word for this, which is called Werdegang. And Werdegang is the process of becoming, of maturing, of ripening, of gaining value. And what I've gotten from today is that we should not only teach this, but it should be part of all our educational guidance, supervision, mentoring, and evaluating and assessment processes. That's what I got off. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Ambet. Fantastic. capturing of what was going on. Look, I propose one thing, which is we're supposed to finish in about 5 minutes' time. We started late. All this talent in the room. Could we hang in an extra 15 or 20 minutes and have a quick panel session with some questions? Be okay? All right. Would you like to invite you up, please, our presenters, and have a seat? And we'll take questions. And I'm not sure, Dave, whether there's any questions on the email. What I might do is pass the roving mic to you lot, and we'll use this with the audience. Trust you with
Okay, for the room.
nothing there. Would you? Use that as a roving? Oh, thanks.
No, there's nothing there. No questions.
Look, I'll kick off by saying let's give Heather a chance to respond to any questions from her presentations. I mean, I love the idea of the long, slow, long, careful looking. And getting someone to look at any object, let alone an art object, for 15 minutes and holding, I guess you're saying, please hold interpretation or hold a rush to judgment. Is that something that you're priming them with before you start to actually feed back? How do you go about that process?
There's a few different sessions that I do. As I suggested, it's very much a place in which you develop the particular seminar according to what the needs are of the clinician. But on those which are focusing on dividing the objective and the interpretive phase and having that long, slow look specifically to gather lots of information without jumping to conclusions, that's exactly what we do. And I demonstrate to them what that process might be before they start to do it. But I think there's, I always enjoy sending them off to look at the object and then just watching and seeing how they're engaging. And sometimes I do this as a one student per artwork, depending on the size of the group. Med students I tend to get sort of 6 or 7 in, but with special needs dentistry, because we're getting through a whole second year cohort, we work with 14 in a group, so they work in pairs. So then I let them talk about what they're seeing in that first bit of time, so they can compare and share it. And I think there are different skills that are happening there, but all valid and all based on this idea of close attention and a little bit like that being in the moment, but with a visual thing. And I think the benefit of doing that with art is that it's going to be interesting enough. There'll be enough content to engage and to have to explore, and there'll be enough questions inherent in the object to make you have to think about things. And so, I mean, you could look at a Vegemite jar for 15 minutes, but you're probably going to get bored, whereas there are other things happening with art.
Is there anyone on the other side, or are we just ritualising?
I know there are people online.
Oh, there are people online.
Yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to save your foot. Heather, can I ask you what you understand if you use the term objective looking? Because where I come from, that doesn't exist.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And in fact, we often have that conversation with the students, and they articulate, well, how can I be objective about this? We, for example, in the science subjects that I work into, and we parallel it with that sort of making a hypothesis, or making an observation without a hypothesis. So in each context, it's as someone was saying, that the language that you use, it's hard to find the words. Well, you were saying, yeah, about what language you're going to use, but there's something about that in the cross-disciplinary learning context that you can say language doesn't mean the same for all of us, but what we're going to come to in this session is an understanding of what the process we're seeking to achieve is. So with an artwork, it may be, for example, that image of the bushrangers, I'll say, okay, we're going to observe this in terms of the content of the image. I don't need you to talk about surface or paint texture in this instance, because that's another layer of observation. What I want you to look at in this is the narrative content. In another situation in which perhaps we're looking at an abstract object, a large abstract painting, then I might say, I want you to describe everything that you can see about the physicality of this thing, because there's no obvious narrative content. And each of those exercises introduces different challenges in what is objectivity. Does that answer your question?
If I could just posit a question. I just wasn't sure whether people were aware, some may be aware, some may not, that Auntie Miriam Rose is also an acclaimed artist and has done a lot of wonderful artwork over many, many years. I was just wondering, Aunt, if you could give us a little bit of an explanation as to the sorts of ways that you interpret your art when asked by non-Indigenous people. If you could perhaps give us a comment on perhaps some of the assumptions that might come in those questions. What are some commonalities that you've found when trying to interpret your artwork for non-Indigenous people?
It is. We're not very good writers, and we're better at expressing ourselves through art. And I suppose it's more meaningful in the sense that it's being creative, and you can get children to get involved and participate. And I suppose in the early days when you're talking about our elders in the past, the stories were always passed on by word of mouth. And there were times when art was used and told, but majority of the passing on of things, as stories and so on, special places or like sites of significance, because people were always moving around on foot. I suppose it was more easy for children and others to have a better understanding of the landscape and where all the sites of significance were, as in dreaming places, and the formation of the land and how they belong to it. And it's good now that when I was growing up, times started to change in the sense that, and then education, as in the Western education, came into play. Even though there was still a lot of traditional stuff happening, the only times that we were able to spend time with our elders were during the school holidays. We would sit around the campfire, but and a lot of it was to do with us boarding and being cared for by nuns and things like that, and we were given the opportunity of being able to listen to our stories properly. But whatever that was passed on, we kept. And us becoming teachers now in our communities, to teach our kids to work alongside of Western teachers, it's a good thing in a sense that you just don't become a teacher teaching kids and being in the school. You become a teacher for everybody, the adults, the whole community, and the kids in the school, in classrooms. And by, I suppose, passing on the story is much more easier because you've got a captive audience. And to make it more interesting it's through art and drama and corroboree and songs and dances. I think is that all right? And look, like I said earlier on when I was talking, Christianity come into play in our lives as well. So to make it more meaningful to us, when I was growing up, the services that we used to attend with the nuns were in Latin. And then later it got better and it was in English, and now there's Indigenous deacons and Indigenous nuns, and I think one or two Indigenous priests that was more kind of meaningful for us because they'd interpret these things better. in us being able to understand what Christianity was all about, you know. And now that, because I suppose you can say we've got an inbuilt thing in learning about what Christianity is all about, that can come into play too through your art. So I do a lot of biblical art as well, and try and make them somehow, for some of the things that we do, as in the spirituality that I talked about earlier on, that can be connected, you know, like when we're welcoming somebody, a stranger, to our land, and then being christened, that sort of thing.
Could I make a quick request of Uncle to expand on something he said and then throw it to Elsie? You talked about the idea of, in Aboriginal knowledge, of often looking for, an example you quoted was the dark spots in the Milky Way. And if I can relate it visually, in a sense, Heather, I see something akin to this in Rover Thomas paintings. Those big empty spaces, and how he talks about the night sky, there's kind of 3 or 4 stars, this great big space binding it together, if you like. So what are we missing out in those dark spaces? And I know, Uncle, you talk about seeing both sides of the mountains at once. And Elsie, I wonder if you would care to pick it up too in terms of what I think it means for the art of doctoring. Just small questions, really.
Yeah, well, see, talking about art, I think we've altered art a bit, because when you look at it, our paintings tell a story. Now you notice a lot of artists go around putting stories into their art and finding around the extra steps, because before they used to just paint pretty pictures. And our view of that was, it's children's art, it's the first stage of art, and so now they're developing up on this theme of painting a picture. And that's what we do when we look at the sky. We look at the sky a bit differently than most, I suppose, because we look at the Milky Way as Wadley Pari, and that's the Hutt River, and that's where the old people live up in the sky, and the stars are their fires, and so that's what we're going to head for later on, Karalika on high. And so it has the connection between the sky and us, and we have a nice little statement, and we've got it printed on the banks of the Torres there, where the boat, he did those boats, and he made them from letters that he folded to make them boats to travel and send messages about home. And they say, have you got a message that you could put on an open letter? And then on the banks of the Torres, we've got our words there printed, and it says, Naira Karalika Kawinga Te Kuti Yerakumanendi. When the outer world connects to the waters, the two become one. And so we can't say horizon, because that's one thing again, because I told you about we have to deal with two things. So it makes you think in a different manner. So you have to connect the sky and the waters and connect them together to make them one. And so it shows that our form of thinking is not the ultimate, because I think there's no perfect system, but what it tells you that it's good to have different ways of looking at things. And that's what we can learn from each other. You do one thing, and that's good for us. We see the value of that. Two things that's got value. And then Venn comes along and tells you with circles, you can look at 3 or 4 things. So all these things I think we've got to come to terms with. We've got to learn to use different ways of viewing the world and telling stories about it and sharing that knowledge with each other. And see, and I think what's coming about listening to people, even me, to listen to the panel, you see you're learning through art. See, I think you just use these things as a vehicle to get you to observe and take notice of what's going on around you. It's best to go off at a tangent away from yourself. And that's all these things are, like the bit of string. It's only a vehicle to use to get you to extend and see things in a different light. And I think that's what we've got to be on about, because we're in the 21st century, and I think we've got to upgrade our ways of thinking, because we've got to change whether we like it or not. Because to be the same, we've got to change. The philosophers tell us that, and I think that's what our people did. You kept developing up on thinking, and that's what our people did. They did that extra step. See, because you can't last 60,000 years. People don't get it on whims and fancies, lameness, wandering. It's higher intellectual thought and thinking and ways of thinking. That's what our people get to. That's why they captured us. They tell you the way to think, like you've picked it up about the two, there's two truths, how that you deal with truth. No one teaches you that, but we get taught that, how to look at truth. What is truth? How do you come to terms with those sort of issues? And you've got to decide for yourself what it is. You can't go and ask the person, could you tell me the truth? Because that's what kids do in school, they used to say to it. And our people hate that. You think, how could a kid ask you what is truth? You could tell them yes to anything. See, that's what they shouldn't ask you. They should work out what truth is for themselves. And that's what all people should know. And we saw that very early in the piece. And that's what this is all about, sharing knowledge with each other and come to terms with thinking and how you deal with these little problems like that.
Thank you. Can I just say something for a second before I pass it on to you, Elsie? The vehicle idea, that everything you said is so powerful, and for me the environment of the Art Museum is one of those vehicles. Like your string, it's just a different version of the string.
That's right. The string's not important. It's just the vehicle to get you to look more clearly or observe.
Yep. And the other thing that, when you were saying that, just leapt to mind, a student a few days ago was attempting to describe actually a very simple painting that was made in the early 20th century of a young man just sitting on a couch with a cigarette in his hand and a jacket and a vest and a simple shirt. And the student was struggling immensely with describing something that was very simple because she ran out of information really fast. So it's sometimes easier to describe something with lots and lots of stuff than something that's not. So one way to get her to think was to say, well, have a look at what he's not wearing. Think about what isn't there, which will help you to know what is there. And so then she was able, so he hasn't got a tie on. She made some comment like, oh, I couldn't make any, I can't really say what he's wearing. You just tell me what he's wearing. So sometimes it's hard to think back and think, why are they struggling so much with this? You've just got to switch it around and give some other prompt to access information that they really should know, but they're just not seeing for some reason. And then from that absence of information, she was able to say, oh, so no tie, no cuffs, no, so what does this person have instead? Really interesting moments.
I'd like to add too that you could always pick up from when if children are painting and sometimes there's a hidden agenda where kids might not be able to express themselves in how they're feeling, and you can pick it up through the artwork that they do, you know, and just the way that they paint, whatever, or the colours that they use.
Thank you. So when Uncle was talking about the darkness between the light, it reminds me of the time when I first started meditating, and we were asked to meditate on sounds. So we were looking for sounds. And then the instruction was meditate on the silence or the gaps between sounds. And I said, what was that about? Then I suppose it began to dawn on me that silence doesn't have any meaning, intrinsic meaning, unless there's also sound. And sound doesn't have any intrinsic meaning unless there's silence. So everything is related to one another, the two ways of looking at things. And a lot of the work that we do, the difficulty of work that we do, doesn't make sense unless we also bring about the healing that comes with it, so on and so forth. And in a way, difficulties are our teachers. I think the difficult circumstances and conditions are telling us to be moved and to do something, you know. So it's two ways of looking at things. I'm also struck by the two ways of looking at things. In Buddhism, they talk about the conventional truth and the absolute truth. So the conventional truth is that I'm Professor Chan from Hong Kong. I'm here in this conference. But then, you know, a year from now, if I retire, who is this Professor Chan? Do I disappear because the conventional truth of me disappears? I'm no longer a professor. Who am I then? Then obviously comes the absolute truth that everything we are at any time is independent on conditions and the surroundings we're in. So I like the word that you're a father, you're a son, you're a friend, you're a teacher, you're a student. So, you know, we are all of everything, and yet at the same time, at any moment in time, you can label me as this or that, you know. So there's the conventional truth and the absolute truth. But we hang on to the conventional truth because that makes us feel good, a professor, you know, and I'm in charge. You know, I'm the husband at home and I have to have the final say, although in the Chinese family, the wives have the final say, okay? Yeah, so on and so forth, yeah. So it's a non-duality of things, yeah, that we have to look at, okay.
Lambert. We'll just get a, if you don't mind. Yes.
One of the things that struck me in a not so positive way when I came to this country is the incredible commodification of education that goes around here. Education is not a societal need, it's a business. And this morning has been the complete contrast, and this sits with my values much more. I see education as an investment. No, I shouldn't use the word investment, but the thing you do for your people, for your society, for the future. And I can only imagine that you'll work in a similar context. And probably in your language there are equally hideous words like work-ready intern. That's a horrible word. So how do you fight that? How do you shield that? How do you protect your values in education against that always hammering business, key performance indicators context? Do you have anything to share about that?
How long do we have? Yeah. But I suppose in a way it comes back to the fact that the world has to go on, people have to make a living, and people come with different views. But I think common to all of us is this, aspiration to be happy, to be calm, to be contented. And so, coming back to Buddhism, the Four Noble Truths, there is suffering, there's a cause of the suffering, there's a way out of the suffering, and the way out of the suffering is by the Eightfold Noble Path. So there's dissonance in life, there's a cause for the dissonance, there's a way out of the dissonance, and the way out of the dissonance is that. So I think one then needs to look deeply into who are we? I always ask my students to say, who are you? Every year ask yourself, who am I? And what is the nature of the work that I do? What does it mean to be human? I mean, there are so many answers to that, but it's good to ask that question. What does it mean to be human? Why are we different from, say, the animals, so to speak, although they can teach us certain things as well? And what is the nature of the work that we have signed ourselves to do? Every year you may come back with an answer that's different, but keep asking and look back and see how your answer changes. And the thing I learned from the mindful communication from Mick Krasner is about bringing intention, attention, and reflection to what we do. I think the intention is important. So it's asking yourself that question, imagining yourself you are sitting in front of a lake, clear waters, and there's a pebble. The pebble is a question, what is my intention of being here? What is the intention of my work? You throw it, the pebble hits the surface of the water, answer comes back. That's the first answer. And then as the pebble sinks down to the ground, there's another answer. So I think you've got to keep on asking. And if you're still, then it becomes clearer, and you can sort of separate the signal from the noise, so to speak. Yeah, thank you.
I'm aware we've only got a few minutes to go before. Oh, Jenny, can we have a quick one? Because I just want to do 2 or 3 minutes.
Just a quick one. Jenny Madden from Flinders. Lambert touched on the issue of commodification, and it strikes me that everything has to be done in such a hurry. We have children who seem to have very short attention spans, and probably students at universities as well. The main message I have from you today is to take more time in listening and thinking and really getting a good grip on your value system. Has it got harder in the past 5 to 10 years for everybody who's interested in getting people to take more time and not to ask all the questions and sit and listen for longer?
Just from my point of view, coming into working with people in the medical profession or education, it seems to me that there's an increasing desire and need for opportunities to take time. And for me, this is why the work that I do is so enthusiastically received. And so in some ways, to me, there is a response to that pressure by, at least in some individuals within, because obviously I'm working with individuals within a system, but there are people saying, give us these opportunities, and the students seem to respond in the same way. So to me it seems it's the positive end of that trajectory, but I'm sure there's other versions.
I think what I've noticed of late is that people are on about change. They want to change what they're doing, because I think they've woken up that our education system's not right, and they're all mumbling about it and they don't know which way to go. And I should tell you this little story, that one woman wrote a curriculum about Lake Mungo, and when they saw the kids doing Lake Mungo, they got a surprise, because they found out that they were doing more complex things than they thought they could do. And so they've asked the next step. They want to write the curriculum on the Kaurna people now, because they say, how can we learn from that? And I think they'll get surprised what they'll learn from that. Because if you go off on tangents again, you can gain greater insights in yourself. And I think that's what people are asking for now, because you see them talking all over the world about this change, how we've stuck to this antiquated system. And I've talked about it before, because I went through it, and I see it's a silly system, because there's too many questions asked. See, because that's a very bad thing for a kid to be doing, because you're giving them quick, easy answers and it makes them lazy. And they all talk about that. That's why there's a lot of failures in school. See, because people mix up the two things. We always produce what we need, the 30% at the top, but those kids will do it in spite of whether you teach them in Italian or Greek or whatever. They'll get there themselves. I've seen that with my own grandkids. You can't stop them. And that's what the world survives on. But we're not actually getting them there. They're getting themselves there. But the 70% at the bottom what I worry about, because if our people could teach everyone in this country to a fairly high level, and the Germans saw that on the banks of the Torres, because they wrote letters back to Germany, and we got those letters back the other day from our kids that wrote in 1840, wrote letters in Kaurna language, and they wrote in perfect Kaurna, which is very difficult to do. It's a very technical language. And yet those kids wrote in perfect Kaurna, and we got them back the other day, and they've been 175 years in Germany. And so they wrote back, the German missionary, Close, taught them, and he said this in his letter, which I read, and it blew me away. He said, these kids are no different to any kids we taught in Europe. And he's talking about rich kids. They never educated the poor in Germany, and yet these kids are up the street. Show the level. A lot of people don't even know that. They destroyed a high educational system in this country when they took away the language and the culture. Because to learn the language alone is a technical exercise, because it's got all these fanciful words and ways of thinking. And so we've got words about knowledge and nuto, we've got words for everything. And so people had really gone into depth to that, so that's why they came to us. But then we found an extra step. We found that every nation in this country had knowledge that no one else possessed. And I've looked into that, and I'm starting to write about that. And not only that, I first saw it about Europeans. I suddenly saw, you came from Holland, and all the machinery I worked on in the harbours board came from Holland, or Netherlands you call it now. Well, so I suddenly thought, well, they're the experts at that. And so you see every country of the world. We've got maths from the Indians. See, everyone thinks we've done it great. Well, we haven't. We have done it with help from every country's put in the collective. And that's what we've got to realise, and we've got to do it again. We've got to realise that we've got to look at the collective and get back to where we were before, because you can't throw all that stuff away and not get back to some of the truths that were taught years ago. Because we've gone off at this tangent, and it all looks jolly, but underneath it's rotting a bit, because we've got too many people at dependence. And that's a silly way to run a society. Why are you afraid of people having independent skills and be able to manage their own affairs? It's a silly system to me. And that's what I've looked at, because our people taught each person to manage their own affairs and their family. They didn't have to be dependents. They were highly skilled and responsible people.
I'll take that as the last comment, and what a lovely way to finish. I think you've just summarised in a way that I couldn't have summarised the last few hours. I won't even attempt to. We're losing the satellite in about 60 seconds. Can I just say, what a rich session. And what an experience in living in the moment and dealing with the technological stuff-ups that happen. So I've got personally a hell of a lot out of it. There's a lot of questions. I think it's going to take us somewhere really interesting. So I want to thank each and every one of the presenters today, and Lambert, rapporteur, thank you so much. And this will be available as a recording for those who want to access it. Thank you.